Chapter 2148. And Lin felt like it was not a difficult task to make 1,000,000 fans hate him. For some reason, he found all of the Darkwing tribe living beings to be a little adorable. Sorry, brothers, for the sake of the Tai Chu continent and the human race, I have to hurt you, and Lin took a deep breath. Do you know why I called all of you here? I don't know. No matter what the Heavenly Lord tells us to do, we will do anything for you. That's right. Even if I have to tread on fire and die 1,000 deaths, I will not hesitate. All of the Darkwing tribe living beings began to yell in unison, and Lin looked at these fanatical fans and thought back to when he had faced the Blood tribe. They were also just as fanatical and passionate. The Darkwing tribe living beings were quite adorable like this. He really couldn't bear to hurt them like this. The reason why I called you over is actually to explain something to you. And Lin clasped his hands behind his back as a disdainful expression appeared on his face. And Lin continued upon seeing the curious and nervous expressions on the faces of the Darkwing tribe living beings. To be honest, I am actually quite regretful that I accepted all of you. All of the Darkwing tribe living beings' expressions shifted, and some of their faces even paled. And Lin's lips curled up as he looked down at the Darkwing tribe living beings. I'm not trying to target anyone, but I just want to say that all of you are trash. You don't deserve to stand here. You are weak and cowardly, and you don't deserve to follow me. That's right, I don't need you at all, and I look down on you. His arrogant and disdainful words instantly sent shockwaves rippling through the entire Dao Plaza. Boom! The entire Dao Plaza erupted into commotion. Countless Darkwing tribe living beings were in an uproar, and Lin was ecstatic to see all of the excited Darkwing tribe living beings. This was the right reaction. What was the most taboo for an idol? Of course, it was to insult their fans. Fans had their own dignity. If an idol didn't even respect his fans, wouldn't his fans leave him at any moment? Or even turn from fan to hater? And Lin's actions had not only displayed his arrogance, but he had also insulted the Darkwing tribe living beings. How could they not be disgusted by his actions? Come on, all of you hate me. Out of 6,000,000 Darkwing tribe cultivators, it should be easy for 1,000,000 to hate him, right? And Lin excitedly looked at his system to check the progress of the special mission. However, when he looked over, he was dumbfounded. Mission progress. 1%. What? It was only 1%. I put in so much effort to perform, abandoned the burden of being an idol, worked hard to discredit myself, worked hard to discredit my fans, but in the end, almost no fans hated me. While Lin was still in a daze, the Darkwing tribe cultivators on the Dao Plaza were already howling in pain. Woo-woo! I didn't think that I would be so unbearable in the eyes of the God Lord. I don't want to live anymore. His Excellency has gone too far with his words. I hate him. Idiot. What His Excellency said is the truth. Aren't you weak? Aren't you afraid? You've got nothing to say, right? We are weak and cowardly, so His Excellency didn't say anything wrong. Tell me, why do you hate him? One of the Darkwing tribe cultivators, who had clearly been filled with hatred, was instantly rendered speechless by his comrade, and he immediately lowered his head in shame as tears of helplessness flowed down his face. Similar scenes were taking place elsewhere on the Dao Plaza, and Lin watched as the mission progress slid from 1% to 9% 8% 7%. He felt like he was in Sparta. Woo! We are so weak. We are indeed not worthy of following His Excellency. Perhaps we really won't be of much help in battle, one of the Darkwing monarchs suddenly said. Have you guys realized that His Excellency didn't say these things on the day he asked us to follow him? Instead, he chose to say these things today. Another Darkwing monarch came to a sudden realization. Could it be that he feels that the enemy is too powerful and that we will die if we participate in battle? So he doesn't want us to take the risk. That's right. That's why he emphasized that he doesn't need us. He's actually afraid that we will die fighting for him. Think about it. Even though we're weak in this battle against the celestial tribe, every bit of power we have is a bit of power. There's no need for him to say something like that to force us to leave. But he did say that he was thinking about our lives. Woo! His Excellency is the best. One of the Darkwing monarchs had tears streaming down his face. He would rather damage his own image than allow us to be harmed. I will definitely follow a master like this until the day I die. He said, we are weak and cowardly, but isn't that the weakness of the Darkwing tribe? He's using a different method to point out our weaknesses. He's really putting a lot of thought into this. That's enough. His Excellency is the only master of the Blade Knight Monarch. I will definitely become more powerful in the future, and I will never cower in fear. I will follow His Excellency with my life. I will follow His Excellency with my life. Soon, their voices reverberated throughout the entire Dao Plaza, and Lin stared blankly at the emotional Darkwing tribe members before him. He clasped a hand over his heart as he watched the mission progress regress to 0%. Holy F***, CK. Have these Darkwing tribe members gone insane? I was clearly scolding people. I was scolding all of you. All of you looked so moved, and even raised your fighting spirit. What was going on? Of course, and Lin had also heard the Darkwing tribe Cultivator's discussion. It could be said that they had completely misinterpreted his words and completely misunderstood his intentions. It turned out that when fans were crazy to a certain extent, even their idols cursing them could be interpreted as their idols loving them, and Lin was very unwilling to accept this. Don't think too much into it, and don't read too much into it. I really do look down on you. You are all trash, cowardly and weak trash. These words were like a devastating blow to the average fan. Hurry up and hate me. Please, I beg of you, hurry up and hate me. And Lin was almost begging them in his heart. However, the Darkwing tribe members were not angry at all. Instead, they were even more moved as they nodded incessantly. Some of them even began to cry out loud. That's right, His Excellency, we are trash. Your disdain will forever be my motivation. A Darkwing tribe beauty covered her face in embarrassment. I am a cute little piece of trash. Only His Excellency can classify me and Lin. Insane. These Darkwing tribe members must have gone insane. They must have been struck by the system's AI-lowering halo. And Lin felt like his vision was about to darken. CK. What was he supposed to do? The gathering at the Dao Plaza came to an end just like that. It couldn't be said that the Darkwing tribe members' recognition and loyalty toward Lin had increased to a whole new level. All of them were extremely moved, and they all began to cultivate diligently as if they had been injected with chicken blood. Knowing shame and then bravely, this was probably what it meant to be in such a state. It was very inspiring, and Lin left in a daze. He couldn't beat them, and scolding them was useless. If he praised them, they would fly into the sky. What should he do? He had underestimated the image of himself in the hearts of others. He was like an invincible golden statue. Only now did he feel the system's deep malice. The system definitely would not give him free marks. This mission was extremely difficult. Chapter 2149. And Lin was feeling very dejected at this moment. His image in everyone's hearts was so good and flawless. This should have been something to be happy about, but he couldn't bring himself to be happy now. The 666 dystocia experience had him panicking beyond belief. I can't give up just like this. I have to pull myself together. And Lin took a deep breath and began to think about how to ruin his image. Generally speaking, there were several ways to ruin someone. The first was to expose one's flaws. But I'm so perfect, so what flaws do I have? The second was to expose one's dark history, such as doing something disgusting, unspeakable, or even something infuriating. It would be best if it was something that involved morality. And Lin thought about it carefully. He had always been a despicable person, but there was always a bottom line in his heart that he would never do anything that violated his bottom line. He thought back to his past and realized that he really hadn't done anything bad ever since he was weak and powerful. Was he going to ruin his image? Make up some dark history? That would definitely result in a crushing defeat. Just think about what had happened at the Dow Plaza today. Hence, making up a dark history was very difficult. The third was to offend his fans. That wasn't necessary. The fourth was to take a wrong stand in the face of a major issue. And Lin had been revered as the hero of the Tai Chu continent, and he was the main force in the war against the heavenly human tribe. He had countless worshippers, and his determination to resist the heavenly human tribe had not wavered. He couldn't announce to the world that he was going to join the heavenly human tribe, right? If he did that, the other powerful beings would most likely think that his mind had been controlled by the heavenly gods. Perhaps that would cause a massive commotion. Sigh, I'm in such a difficult situation. And Lin sighed. And Lin, what are you thinking about? Why do you look so sad? At this moment, a clear and melodious voice suddenly entered his ears. And Lin turned around to find a beautiful woman in a jade dress standing beside him with a concerned expression on her face. Xiaolan. And Lin looked at Su Xiaolan, and he was just about to voice out his grievances when a thought suddenly exploded in his mind, as if a brilliant idea had occurred to him. Su Xiaolan, I need you to cooperate with me. And Lin spoke in an excited voice. Above Yu Tong Divine City. Suddenly, countless thunderbolts roared. Streaks of blue lightning streaked across the cloudy sky, lighting up the entire city. They were like terrifying lightning dragons that were swimming in the sky, baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. And Lin, you heartless man, I'm going to kill you. The woman's angry and aggrieved voice resounded through the entire sky. One by one, the living beings walked out of their rooms and looked towards the sky. Huh, isn't that the divine Phoenix Maiden? What's wrong with her? She seems very angry. Sigh, haven't you heard? She said and Lin is a heartless man. Hiss, could it be? Everyone's curiosity and gossipy hearts were aroused at this moment. This was an earth-shattering event that could shake the entire continent. They loved to gossip about such things. The Lightwing clan, the True Demon clan, and even the monks from the Buddhist kingdom of the West all looked up into the sky at the beautiful lady. Who was it that had the guts to try and steal the divine Phoenix Maiden's man? Wait, that wasn't the point. The point was that Enlin had cheated on her. Everyone came to a sudden realization, and they felt even more excited. At this moment, Enlin had already appeared from within the dark clouds, and he looked at Su Xiaolan with a panicked expression. Su Xiaolan, I've been wrongly accused. There really is nothing going on between us. This is all a misunderstanding. Let me explain. Tui, scumbag. Some of the Lightwing clan women were already spitting on the ground. That sounds so familiar. Is this the language of scumbags? The number of detestable people began to increase explosively, and it instantly broke through the 10,000 mark. That was 1%, and Lin couldn't help but burst into laughter upon seeing this. As expected, a perfect man like him could only be ruined by cheating. That's right, no matter how perfect he was, he would still be condemned by everyone if he cheated on his wife. That was an indication of disloyalty and betrayal. Seeing Su Xiaolan being cheated on, all of the living beings were bound to unite against a common enemy. This was especially evident among the female population. No matter who he was, no matter what the reason was, they were going to call him a scumbag first. And Lin was initially quite elated. However, upon seeing that the mission progress bar in the system had skyrocketed to 10%, he started to panic again. At this moment, some people in Yutong City were already discussing among themselves. And Lin cheated on her? That's impossible. They were so lovey-dovey in the past. Besides, is there any woman in this world who can compare with the divine Phoenix Maiden? The divine Phoenix Maiden's beauty transcends beyond that of any other species, and her powers are at the God of creation stage. She's a supreme grade female immortal that no one would even dare to dream of. Why would Lin fall in love with another woman? You're right. There must be some misunderstanding. Let's hear Lin's explanation before making a judgment. Most of the spectators in Yutong City were more rational in the end. And Lin discovered that his mission progress was regressing. F***CK. No, he couldn't continue like this. He had to get more information. All right, I'll listen to your explanation. Su Xiaolan pointed her dragon sparrow sword at Lin's neck with a cold expression. Tell me, what's going on between you and Her Majesty Niwa? And Lin was dumbstruck upon hearing this. What the F***CK? Even Niwa was dragged into this. This wave was too fierce, wasn't it? He had initially thought that he would be able to get some information out of the way, but Su Xiaolan had already made the first move. This attack was extremely ferocious, and Yutong City instantly erupted into a frenzy. My God, the mistress is Niwa. That's right. If there's anyone in this world who can compete with the divine Phoenix Maiden, then it has to be the paramount goddess of the demon tribe, Niwa. My God, doesn't that mean that there's a very high chance that Lin has cheated on her? After all, he didn't even bother to mention Niwa's name. Tui, scumbag. The male cultivators stomped their feet in frustration, while the female cultivators were enraged. Instantly, the number of people who hated Lin skyrocketed. The number of people who hated Lin immediately broke through the 300,000 mark. It was already 30%, so he had to work harder. Even though Lin was quite panicked that Niwa had been dragged into this, he had no choice but to continue the act. He could already see hope in completing his mission. There's nothing going on between me and Niwa. We only hugged each other like friends, and Lin explained. Everyone erupted into another commotion. They hugged each other. The mission progress had reached 50%. Tears welled up in Su Xiaolan's eyes. Nonsense. I saw you kissing her with my own eyes that day. Is this something a friend should do? And Lin was dumbstruck. Was this plot really that exciting? Xiaolan, don't go overboard. Xiaolan, I might have kissed her, but the person I truly love is you. And Lin replied with a grief-stricken expression. Boom! Everyone erupted into an uproar upon hearing this. And Lin's mission progress had instantly reached 100%. Chapter 2150. And Lin was on the verge of tears of joy. He had finally succeeded. It really wasn't easy. Everything he had done seemed to be worth it at this moment. And Lin was just about to explain everything when he suddenly saw the dragon's sparrow sword slash down upon his face, almost blinding him with its dazzling light. Scumbag, eat this. The vermilion bird origin energy imbued within the sword projection whistled through the air. All living beings within a radius of over 500 kilometers were struck by a bone-chilling, killing intent. It was extremely terrifying. And Lin didn't even have a chance to react before the dragon sparrow sword struck his chest. Rip! The blade of the sword sliced a massive gash into his body. Boundless sword intent bore down on his body as he flew through the air. Ah, it hurts. And Lin let loose a blood-curdling cry. Stop, Xiaolan. Our mini-plot has already come to an end. The mini-plot had come to an end. This was a code word that only they knew. It meant to end the performance. After that, he could explain to everyone that this was just a small performance by him and Xiaolan. That way, he would be able to reverse the image that had been shattered. This wave of operations could be said to be a successful plan, and Lin was extremely aggrieved that he had been struck by the sword projection because he had yelled too slowly. Now that he had taken the initiative to stop, he could finally heave a sigh of relief. He then saw another sword projection drawing closer and closer to him. Scumbag! The dragon sparrow sword descended upon Lin's astonished eyes. The sword projection extended for over 500 kilometers, tearing through the entire heavens. A massive gash appeared on Lin's chest, and he let loose a blood-curdling wail as he was blasted flying for countless kilometers, unable to stop himself. Everyone on the ground couldn't help but shiver when they saw the scene. They there fighting? What terrifying domestic violence! Tui, this isn't domestic violence. This is what happens to scumbags. That sword projection could probably severely wound a heavenly god. This is the first time I've seen such explosive domestic violence. All of the onlookers were astonished. Compared to the other living beings, and Lin was the most shocked one. Didn't he say it was over? Why hasn't Xiaolan stopped? Xiaolan, quick! The performance is over. And Lin thought Xiaolan didn't hear him, so he yelled again. No, the show isn't over. Su Xiaolan raised her sword and slashed. And Lin. Just like that, countless shocking sword chis began to surge in the sky, as well as the man's miserable cries and the cheers of countless people in the city. The next day, the domestic violence in Yutong Divine City came to an end. Afterward, Su Xiaolan and the bandaged and Lin explained to the Yutong Divine City's heaven-crushing army that this was a short video of an affair. They were using this as a warning to those who were unfaithful to their partner that they would be hacked to death and cursed by countless people. In the end, raucous applause erupted in Yutong Divine City. The heaven-crushing army expressed that this was an extremely entertaining performance, and they had all benefited immensely from it. They were also looking forward to Su Xiaolan and Lin's next performance. In a courtyard filled with birds and fragrant flowers, a man with bandages on his body looked up at the sky with a gloomy expression. This man was Lin. He didn't dare to ask why Su Xiaolan had attacked him with her sword and why she had attacked him in such a manner. Afterward, Su Xiaolan's only explanation was that she was too immersed in her character and couldn't extricate herself from it. Anyone with even the slightest bit of emotional intelligence would know that this was a lie. Su Xiaolan had indeed wanted to attack him. Now he finally figured out the reason behind this. That's right, even if it was for the sake of completing the mission. Any girl would be unhappy if Su Xiaolan had been cheated on in front of so many people. And Lin's heart was filled with bitterness. He had come to this realization far too late. He had thought that he had found a way out of this predicament and was ecstatic like a little kid. Who would have thought that he had dug another hole for himself? This was the beginning of another tragedy. It was all the system's fault for issuing this stupid mission. And Lin gritted his teeth at the thought of the system. Even though he was angry, he still had to accept the reward. And Lin removed the bandages on his body and turned his gaze toward a large shiny wheel in his system. This was the god of War Dream Wheel. He had the privilege of drawing the prize once, and he was extremely excited. This wheel was enshrouded in a dazzling dreamy light, concealing the prize within. It was extremely beautiful, and just from its appearance alone, it was several times more impressive than the previous wheels. As expected of the god of War Dream Wheel, it was very famous, and its appearance was even more so. The prize within should be very good, right? If he could obtain a dream-grade weapon, it would be very helpful in future battles. Hence, he had high hopes for this lucky draw. With excitement in his heart, and Lin began to spin the wheel in his mind. The wheel spun rapidly, and Lin's emotions spun along with it. Although he couldn't see what the prize within the wheel was, nor could he see what the needle was pointing at, he was still very nervous and excited. Finally, the wheel slowly came to a stop. A voice as sweet as the sounds of nature rang out. Congratulations, host. You have successfully drawn a dream-grade gift. Dream Bubble Stick. A multicolored light flashed. An item suddenly appeared in Lin's palm. It was a large bottle that glowed with a faint golden light. There was a dream-colored liquid rippling inside, and a guitar-like bubble stick was inserted into the mouth of the bottle. There were 2 circles at the end of the bubble stick. Dream Bubble Stick? And Lin's mind went blank at this moment. He felt as if he had misheard something. And Lin unleashed his divine sense without any hesitation, only to discover that there really wasn't any powerful energy stirring it. He didn't give up. He pulled out the bubble stick from the mouth of the bottle, took a deep breath, and blew at the 2 transparent holes. Instantly, Countless bubbles rippling with colorful light began to fly out from the two small circles. They danced in the air, glowing with an extremely dazzling brilliance under the sunlight, and they even refracted bursts of dreamlike fluorescence. This was a very beautiful, very dreamlike scene, and Lin was momentarily stunned, and tears even began to flow from his eyes. So this is what the dream wheel of fortune draws. It really is so dreamlike, but what do I need this thing for? And Lin's hand was trembling slightly as he held the bubble stick. He poked at the colorful bubble with a finger, and the bubble burst as soon as it was poked. It even turned into colorful streams of light and bloomed like fireworks. It looked very dreamy. The beautiful bubbles only lasted for a moment. He ruined his own image and was beaten up by Xiaolan, but all he got in return was this. No matter how good he was at blowing bubbles, he was still just blowing bubbles. And Lin felt as if his heart had burst like the bubbles in front of him. Trash system. Ruin my life. Chapter 2151. And Lin blew bubbles with a gloomy expression. No matter how dreamy and beautiful the bubbles were, they couldn't dispel his melancholy and **cat mood. After working so hard for so long, he only obtained something like this. No one would be happy. He was still spitting bubbles. He wanted to see if these bubbles had any other special functions, and if there were any other special effects hidden within them. However, experiments after experiments proved that this was just **king, ordinary bubble-blowing thing. It was a useless thing. So beautiful. A voice suddenly sounded. Su Xiaolan had appeared at the entrance of the courtyard. She stood still and stared blankly at the floating bubbles in the courtyard. As the bubbles fluttered in the air, they perfectly blended in with the surrounding environment, releasing an ever-changing, colorful brilliance. It looked exceptionally dreamy and beautiful, and Lin saw the amazement and love in Su Xiaolan's eyes. It was as if she was a little girl who had never seen the world and suddenly saw a particularly beautiful scene. She couldn't help but be surprised and amazed. Xiaolan with this expression was especially cute. For the first time, and Lin felt that this dreamy bubble stick wasn't so useless. With this thought in mind, he silently made a decision in his heart. Perhaps this thing could be used for that matter. And Lin, this is all you're doing? Su Xiaolan looked at the bubbles and asked. Her beautiful and enchanting eyes reflected countless colorful bubbles, making her look somewhat dreamy. Yes, this is my gift to you. Do you like it? And Lin said with a smile and blew bubbles at Su Xiaolan. A bunch of small bubbles flew toward Su Xiaolan. Don't think that I will forgive you just because you did these things. Su Xiaolan slapped the dreamy bubbles that flew toward her. The corners of her mouth curled up inadvertently, betraying her current mood. At the end of the day, she was still a young girl over 100 years old. She couldn't resist some dreamy and beautiful things. Why do some girls like shiny things? It's all because it's pretty. Actually, there was no need for so many practical things. Beautiful, romantic, and that would be it. The corners of Su Xiaolan's mouth curled up, and she was utterly unable to conceal the smile on her face. As she flicked her sleeves, it was as if a green lotus had bloomed and countless multicolored bubbles moved along with her, causing her to glisten with divine light and give birth to a magnificent aura. It was like a peerlessly beautiful painting, and Lin was stunned for a moment. This was the most dreamy scene in the world. He hurriedly continued to blow bubbles, and Su Xiaolan was very cooperative. Her sleeves danced lightly, and her incomparably graceful figure was like a graceful butterfly dancing among the dreamy bubbles. Countless bubbles revolved around her like beautiful fairies, and it was very harmonious and perfect. And Lin felt that he could remember this scene for the rest of his life. Praise the system. He had wronged the system. This thing was indeed a hidden divine artifact. That's right, the dream bubble stick was a top-notch tool for picking up girls. As Lin thought of this, an infatuated smile appeared on his face. Outside Yutong City, in Zai City, This was the center of the central battlefield. Most of the war resources were transported to Tong Divine City through the spatial gate, so the living beings in the city were very busy. Everyone was a diligent porter. A woman in a black robe stood silently at the center of the city. She was just about to do something when she saw a piece of shocking news. She held a newspaper in her hand, and her body trembled uncontrollably. There was a headline on the newspaper, shocking. The truth behind the Divine Phoenix maiden-beating sect leader Enlin. And Nuwa was the third party? This was an earth-shattering turn of events. The woman almost charged over and tore Enlin to shreds upon seeing this headline. She was Nuwa. What had happened between her and Enlin? She became even more enraged after reading the headline. No one had ever dared to say something like this about her. Hug, kiss, do Enlin and Su Xiaolan want to die? Even though it was clarified in the end that this was just a small theater and that everything was fake, she was still enraged. No one had ever dared to make fun of her like this in her entire life. Humph, who would have thought? I didn't provoke you, but you came to provoke me first. Nuwa gritted her teeth tightly while her eyes that were usually extremely gentle were suffused with a wisp of a cold light at this moment. So be it. What you've done has made my mind even more resolute. Nuwa raised her head to look at the gargantuan spatial gate. There were countless resources being transported in and out of it, and a cold smile appeared on her face. Days passed by one after another. After a massive battle, the two sides were locked in a stalemate. The heavenly human tribe army on the Western Front was no longer a secret. The powerful beings of the West Sea Alliance also joined the heaven-crushing United Army on the Central Front under the direct leadership of Enlin. Lan Xiaoni was ecstatic to see Big Boss Enlin again. She wore a blissful expression on her face every day, and she would occasionally offer delicious seafood to Big Boss as a tribute. At the same time, she was also very nervous around Su Xiaolan. Even though she was a powerful heavenly god and was already a lofty living being in the West Sea, she was still very nervous for some reason. Underling Lan, it's very inconvenient for your West Sea Alliance army to fight on land, so I'll give you a sea transformation divine tool that will allow you to transform a large area into seawater, Enlin said. Big Boss Enlin is the best. Lan Xiaoni nodded with a dainty smile. She was already prepared for this. She could transform a large area into a sea by herself. But she didn't say that out loud. She only wanted to praise her big boss. By the way, Demon Lord Ling Gu has been insisting on following me. He even said that he already possesses combat prowess comparable to that of a heavenly god. Is that true? And Lin asked. It's true. Lan Xiaoni recalled the image of Enlin pummeling a heavenly god, and Lin nodded upon hearing this. Then I agree to let him join the Gods of Destruction team. You have no objections, right? Of course not. Lan Xiaoni agreed to all of Enlin's requests. By the way, Big Boss Enlin, can you recruit me into the Gods of Destruction team as well? Lan Xiaoni turned to Enlin with a beseeching expression. No, the West Sea Alliance army can't go without their leader. Enlin immediately turned her down. The Gods of Destruction team was a secret team that he had established, and they were about to carry out the most dangerous plan of all. Lan Xiaoni was the pillar of the West Sea Alliance, so she couldn't disappear from the team. Chapter 2152. Lan Xiaoni was still unwilling to give up. But isn't the Divine Phoenix Maiden supposed to guard Tong City as well? Why can she join the Gods of Destruction team? And Lin blinked in confusion. He didn't know what to say. All right. After a short while, and Lin couldn't find any reason to refute this, so he reluctantly agreed. However, you've joined the team now, so your current mission is to lead the West Sea Alliance in defending Tong City. Haha, don't worry. Big Boss and Lin, leave it to me. Lan Xiaoni patted her voluptuous chest with a smug expression. Even though they couldn't do anything together, joining this team gave her a greater sense of participation and allowed her to get closer to Big Boss and Lin. This was why she was so happy. The Gods of Destruction team would be led by Enlin, with Su Xiaolan as the vice leader. The other members would be Yun Menjing, the battling Buddha Michael, Demon Emperor Siyu, Demon Lord Lingu, and Lan Xiaoni. The objective of forming this small team was to slay a paramount, heavenly god in a situation where they least expected it to happen. The situation was currently at a stalemate. Everyone was biding their time. However, in terms of power alone, the two sides were evenly matched. The Heavenly Human Tribe United Army had managed to turn the tables on the heaven-crushing United Army into a stalemate. This was nothing short of a miracle. However, even though the heaven-crushing United Army was in a stalemate, the Heavenly Human Tribe United Army didn't dare to make any rash moves. Because in a battle of this level, any mistake could lead to a reversal of advantage and disadvantage, or even lead to a complete loss. All of the paramount heavenly gods knew that the heaven-crushing United Army didn't dare to take the initiative. They could only rely on the heaven-punishing formation in Yutong City to unleash their full power. However, it was exactly under these circumstances that the heavenly gods thought that the heaven-crushing United Army wouldn't take the initiative to attack. Of course, there was an even more important reason. The heavenly sea god had not contacted Enlin for a long time, and he had secretly contacted Enlin to inform him of a piece of information. The heavenly light god was at her weakest when she was undergoing a transformation, and it was the easiest time to take advantage of her weakness. Furthermore, during this transformation, she couldn't use her Tao true form in any battle. Otherwise, she would immediately die from the backlash. In other words, it would be the easiest to ambush the heavenly light goddess at this time. And Lin thought it made sense. He immediately formed the Gods of Destruction team and decided to behead the Goddess of Life. You heard right, and Lin is going to kill the paramount heavenly life god, the heavenly god who had forced him to sacrifice his life behind the scenes. Of course, he wasn't doing this for revenge, but for a reason. Night fell. Today, dark clouds covered the sky, and the moon and stars gradually covered the sky. The land was shrouded in darkness, and only Yutong City was brightly lit. It was like a bright pearl in the darkness, a bustling city that never sleeps. A few figures began to slowly move toward the white nectar, sea, through the darkness. Sect leader Enlin, is it really okay for us to just charge over like this? Michael asked in a slightly panicked voice. The battling Buddha sneered. "Huh, you're the most powerful being in the Lightwing clan. Aren't you embarrassed to be so cowardly? We can't go wrong by following Big Brother Anne's arrangements. Is he going to screw us over?" Goku's trust in Enlin was the highest among all of them. This was his personality. He would place unconditional trust in those he approved of. There are some things that I can't explain to all of you right now. I'm afraid that the heavenly Tao will detect it. After all, the heavenly Tao is omnipresent, and the more people know about it, the clearer its senses will be. Believe in me. I'll definitely lead all of you to glory again. If someone else were to say this, everyone would definitely scoff at it. However, this was Enlin, and even though everyone present was a powerful being from a certain tribe or region, they still firmly believed that Enlin could lead them to create miracles. Demon Lord Lingu was even beginning to fantasize about how many eggs he would be able to eat in the future if he followed Enlin, Su Xiaolan, Yun Menjing Michael, Demon Lord Lingu, Demon Emperor Siyu, the battling Buddha Lan Xiaoni. They were all members of the God-slaying team. They were going to create miracles again. A pure white ocean appeared before their eyes. A divine tree pierced straight into the heavens, piercing through the dark clouds. And Lin knew that this wasn't the world tree. Instead, it was merely a substitute for the world tree created by the heavenly life god. It didn't have any immortal and eternal characteristics, nor did it have the ability to nurture miracles. It was merely a symbol of the heavenly human tribe headquarters. The heavenly human tribe army of over 100 million resided on the divine tree. There were hundreds of thousands of heavenly human tribe powerful beings patrolling the area in a radius of over 500 kilometers, and all of them were personally led by Heaven Pioneer stage great generals. However, none of them detected the approach of Enlin and the others. Maintain your void body mantra and don't let your guard down. Enlin enshrouded everyone in a layer of black membrane, thereby creating a double layer of concealment. Even the paramount heavenly gods wouldn't be able to detect their presence unless they unleashed detection spell techniques. They slowly moved toward the divine tree. Enlin's eyes suddenly became clear and translucent, and a peculiar ripple proliferated throughout heaven and earth, allowing him to observe everything between heaven and earth. Divine Simulation Technique. This was a spell technique that allowed Enlin to sense the workings of heaven and earth to the greatest extent. This was actually just one of the abilities of the paramount heavenly gods of darkness. This was also a secret that Enlin had only discovered after attaining the complete divine Tao of darkness. The divine might technique was actually the manifestation of the heavenly god's might. The divine inspection technique was the manifestation of the all-encompassing and omniscient characteristics of the heavenly Tao in order to detect certain objects. The divine plunder technique was the manifestation of the devouring and plundering characteristics of the divine Tao of darkness. The buff technique was the manifestation of the origin energy of the netherworld, which was the manifestation of the power of darkness. There was also the dark immortal transformation, which was the manifestation of the ultimate enhancement technique of the divine Tao of darkness. Of course, this was a high-level mystic technique that utilized the principles of the divine Tao of darkness, which was extremely profound and abstruse. Even at his current level, Enlin was still struck by a sense of awe when he turned around and looked at it. As for why the lightning manipulation technique was able to control divine lightning, it was actually because he was using his power of darkness to forcefully interfere with the heavenly Tao. The system's function seemed to be to activate the power of darkness within his body in advance. That's right, he had initially thought that the power bestowed upon him by the system was extremely bad *SS, but it was actually just his own power. The system's true function was most likely to screw him over after activating his power. Sigh, the more he thought about it, the more he felt like he had been screwed over. Enlin shook his head and discarded these complicated thoughts. At this moment, he had already gleaned everything through his divine simulation technique. As expected, there are only 2 paramount heavenly gods on the divine tree. An elated expression gradually appeared on Enlin's face. Chapter 2153. Enlin was initially a little uncertain, but now he was completely certain. There were only 2 auras that posed a threat to him at the top of the divine tree. This meant that one of the paramount heavenly gods had gone out for some reason, and that reason was most likely related to how to deal with him. The 3 paramount heavenly gods are trying to kill me first instead of dealing with the other powerful beings. Enlin chuckled coldly. But they must have forgotten that day and night are different for me. The day was the heavenly light goddess's home turf, while the night was the heavenly darkness god's home turf. Enlin was invincible in the dark. Not to mention, the only source of light in the dark was the light of the stars and the moon, which were also obscured by the dark clouds. Now that everything was in place, Enlin could be said to be at his peak condition. He wouldn't be afraid even if the heavenly light goddess came. The heavenly sea god wanted Enlin to deal with the weakened heavenly light goddess. The heavenly sea god's words had to be taken in reverse. The 3 heavenly gods knew that the heavenly light goddess would become even more powerful after her transformation, and they also knew that this was the best time to deal with her. However, the heavenly life goddess and the heavenly sky god chose not to do so. Why? It was clear that apart from the idea of using the tiger to devour the wolf, they were also confident that they could deal with the heavenly light goddess, whose combat prowess had skyrocketed. Didn't this mean that the 3 paramount heavenly gods were the most terrifying when they joined forces? Thus, Enlin decided to take care of the biggest threat first. The key was how to take care of them. They couldn't just mindlessly charge into the enemy's base camp and kill the commander, right? If things were that simple, there would be no need for the stalemate. Who knew how many terrifying traps were waiting for them at the top of the divine tree? They would be walking right into the trap if they charged in without thinking. There was no way they could win. So what would Enlin do? Enlin looked up at the towering divine tree before diving headfirst into the ocean. The members of the Gods of Destruction team dove into the ocean as well, and they disappeared into the darkness of the ocean in no time. Enlin followed the tree of God all the way down to the bottom of the sea, diving hundreds of thousands of meters deep. Finally, at the bottom of the tree of God's roots, he saw a glowing green door of light. My dark night has a secret characteristic that not even the heavenly gods know about. That is, every time night descends, I can sense the existence of all enemies. And if I'm unable to sense the existence of the third overgod, it means that the overgod is most likely no longer in this world. And Lin's eyes were dark and deep. He looked at the green door of light and said slowly, "If I want to leave this world, the best place to set up a passageway would be the Heavenly Human Tribe's base camp, which is able to shield me from outside detection." I was indeed unable to detect the existence of this gate between the two worlds, but I can see it now. The ocean has to communicate with me, while the sky is responsible for reconnaissance and divination. As expected, the heavenly life goddess has disappeared this time. A smile appeared on Enlin's face. Everything was under control. Their target was the heavenly life goddess, the battling Buddha, Yun Menjing, and the others were all extremely excited upon seeing the gate of light, and they almost couldn't help but exclaim in admiration at Enlin. None of them knew that there was a secret gate here, and this secret gate was actually a gate between the two worlds that led to another world. What did this entail? They knew very well what it meant. Closing the door and beating the dog was their favorite pastime. The battling Buddha was just about to charge in with his staff when he was stopped by Enlin. "Don't worry. There's still a heavenly god guarding the other side. The heavenly life goddess is quite meticulous. Even though she's so well hidden, she still left a heavenly god behind to inform her," Enlin said as he looked at the empty seabed up ahead. Everyone else faltered upon hearing this. They couldn't see any other heavenly gods, and they couldn't even detect any signs of life. If there really is a heavenly god, then we're in trouble. Demon Emperor Siyu sighed. Even he was unable to detect the existence of that heavenly god, but he didn't doubt Enlin's words in the slightest. After all, there was no reason for Enlin to lie to them. That's true. Heavenly gods possess extremely powerful immortality, and even gods of creation stage beings are unable to kill them in one go. They have plenty of opportunities to report any sudden developments to the paramount heavenly god. Michael's brows furrowed. "What are you guys talking about?" "I can insta-kill it," Enlin said. Michael opened his mouth to speak, but he suddenly found himself unable to continue. Everyone, "Then why are we waiting for you? We'll be watching your performance. Do you need any help?" Yun Menjing seemed to be extremely fond of Enlin's aura, and she took the initiative to lean against Enlin's side. Darkwing shuddered slightly as he asked this. "There's no need. It's just an ordinary heavenly god. All you need to do is follow me closely." Enlin shook his head in a very natural manner. Everyone's heart jolted upon hearing this. What a domineering and powerful man. "Brother Enlin, do you know what kind of heavenly god that is? Why can't I see it with my golden eyes, fiery eyes?" The battling Buddha scratched his bald head in confusion. "It's normal that you can't see it. This heavenly god is far too special. If it weren't for the fact that I possess the power of the heavenly gods, I wouldn't be able to see it either," Enlin replied with a smile. "Its name is Nothingness, and it's also known as the heavenly god Nothingness. It can reduce all existences to nothingness. At the same time, it also exists in the form of nothingness," Enlin explained. Michael was shocked. "There's a heavenly god like this?" "It's clearly nothingness. So how can it still be referred to as existence? Yun Menjing was a little perplexed by this heavenly God. Nothingness and existence are contradictory, but it's actually not that difficult to understand. Nothingness is its form of power and life form, while existence is its heavenly Tao characteristic. They can perfectly fuse together. This heavenly God isn't very powerful, so it can't actively attack. It can only exist in the form of a trap and reduce all harmful existences in its path to nothingness. However, its uniqueness is indeed very useful. You can't see it, but it can sense you when you approach it, then engulf you into nothingness. And Lin's inky eyes were still fixed on the empty and lifeless seabed, and a faint smile appeared on his face. All of the other powerful beings shuddered in fear. This ability wasn't just useful, it was terrifying. This was a top-notch trap. If it weren't for the fact that Lin was here, all of them would have fallen for it. Seeing as that heavenly God's existence is nothingness, and it can't be seen or touched, and Lin, how are you going to destroy it? Yun Menjing looked at Lin with reverence and admiration on her face. Its mistake is that it's facing me. A chaotic black vortex appeared behind Lin. Darkness spread through the surroundings like ink, and darkness that was deeper than the ocean and more primordial than nothingness surged toward the green door of light at this moment. Why can I kill it so easily? Because I'm its superior. Chapter 2154. And Lin was heavenly God, void God superior. He had sensed this the instant he saw heavenly God, void God. Every paramount heavenly God had many lackeys under their command. For example, the heavenly sea god's heavenly weather god, heavenly mirror god, heavenly dark river god, heavenly goddess Lanya, heavenly liquid god, as well as the heavenly god of water, and Lin naturally had his own lackeys as well. However, none of them seemed to have come to join him after his identity had been verified. That's right, none of his lackeys seemed to acknowledge him as their boss. Perhaps it was because he had killed too many heavenly gods, or perhaps it was because he didn't acknowledge the heavenly God's existence in the first place. Or perhaps it was because his paramount heavenly God of darkness sounded very evil and villainous, but the righteous heavenly gods were unable to accept this. In any case, not a single heavenly God had come, and Lin didn't really care about this. Thinking back now, heavenly goddess Lin, you seem to have been one of his lackeys as well. She had even said that it was a pity that she couldn't see him again with tears in her eyes. He was quite perplexed at the time, but he was starting to understand why now. The heavenly fallen god that had been killed by the night monarch was most likely one of his lackeys as well. Even though he had never met him before, as the heavenly darkness god, he had this intuition. His lackeys didn't come to join him, or even his enemies, so Lin was naturally not going to hold back. He was going to make his lackeys experience the horror of being dominated by their boss. A darkness that was deeper than the ocean and more absolute than nothingness enshrouded the entire space within a radius of several dozen kilometers around the green gate of light. The void that was enveloped within seemed to become unstable due to fear. This was the first time that the battling Buddha and Michael had been so close to the divine Tao of darkness, and they were all extremely astonished by this extreme darkness that threatened to engulf their entire existence. Is the higher-ups really not going to be able to detect such a large-scale attack? Michael was a holy light cultivator, and he couldn't help but tremble at the sight of this darkness. Don't worry, true darkness doesn't exist. If it doesn't exist, then no one will be able to detect my presence aside from light. And Lin's lips curled up into a smile. Nothingness was a very hidden power. Empyrean God, Void had already confirmed this. As for Lin, he was even more adept at using his nothingness than Empyrean God Void. He had used his nothingness to conceal his aura, making it so that no Empyrean God would be able to detect what was happening here. Just like that, the darkness kept shrinking toward the green door. And Lin suddenly felt an extremely powerful force of nothingness colliding with his darkness, trying to turn his darkness into nothingness. At the same time, A stream of information flowed with all its might, wanting to transmit information to the higher-ups. Unfortunately, all the information was devoured by Enlin's darkness. Empyrean god Voidform's cries were completely ignored as he was completely sealed. Not only that, but when it channeled all of its power of nothingness into the darkness, it was devoured by another power of nothingness. Moreover, it was turned into nothingness in a mocking manner. Darkness, you're actually the heavenly darkness god. What are you doing here? A terrified voice that was on the verge of breaking down suddenly sounded, and Lin's brows furrowed slightly. Call me heavenly darkness god. Boom! The darkness surged violently toward the center. The heavenly god's anguished wails instantly erupted. You can't kill me. Otherwise, the other paramount heavenly gods won't let you get away with this. Empyrean god's anguished voice was laced with a hint of threat, and Lin couldn't be bothered to respond to him and continued to ensnare him with darkness. He keeps screaming. No heavenly god will come to save you even if you scream until your throat is hoarse. A sinister smile appeared on Enlin's face as he continued to crush the heavenly god mercilessly. This was an attack that he had unleashed with all of his power of the divine Tao of Darkness. Not only was it extremely powerful, but it also perfectly nullified all of Empyrean God's powers. Empyrean God didn't even have a chance to call for reinforcements. A series of anguished wails rang out as proof that Empyrean God was still alive. Ah, heavenly darkness God, I was wrong. Please spare my life. I'll follow you. I'll follow you right now. Can you spare my life? In the face of Empyrean God's despair, Empyrean God finally lowered his regal head and begged for his life. And Lin faltered slightly upon hearing this before continuing his onslaught. He wasn't in a daze because he was hesitant. Rather, he didn't think that his opponent would be so spineless. He didn't have such a spineless underling. So why didn't he learn from his number one underling, Lan Xiaoni? Thus, the area encompassed by the green gate between the two worlds shrank further and further. In the end, Empyrean God's anguished wails reverberated as it shrank to a single point before disappearing. Everything became peaceful again. However, there were still faint specks of light from the shattered divine halos in the ocean. Those were the final pieces of evidence of Empyrean God's existence, but they were instantly engulfed by the darkness in the blink of an eye. The victorious fighting Buddha, Yun Menjing, Demon Emperor Siyu, Demon Lord Lingu, and Mi Jiaolai were all dumbfounded upon seeing this. Far too brutal, far too terrifying. They could see the shattered specks of light from the divine halos, so they knew that a heavenly god had really been slain. A mighty heavenly god was killed by Enlin, just like that. Michael swallowed with astonishment on his face. This is the most straightforward battle I've ever seen in which a heavenly god died. Truly impressive. Even Demon Emperor Siyu, who was accustomed to grand spectacles, found it difficult to conceal his astonishment. Just when everyone thought that this was the end of the battle, the evil-slaying sword on Enlin's back suddenly rose into the sky, and a divine light erupted forth as countless thin black lines shot forth to form a massive net that blotted out the entire sky. At that moment, everyone felt as if thousands of wills of the way were surging in the deep sea. Every single black line was an independent and powerful way. They intertwined and connected with each other, forming an unimaginable giant web of the way that wrapped around everything below. And Lin's divine Tao of Darkness also fused into the massive net at this moment, elevating its power to a few levels, transforming it into a net of Tao that was capable of binding all Tao. It began to enshroud itself around something before slowly contracting and adjusting it. At the same time, a peculiar light flashed on the net of Tao. A thin line suddenly shot forth from the massive net before entangling itself around Enlin's wrist. Then a peculiar light flowed into Enlin's body through the massive net like liquid. At this moment, and Lin could feel his power of Tao growing at a steady rate. The system interface also began to flash, and Lin opened it to find a few words flashing within. "Congratulations, host. You have obtained the power of nothingness." Immediately afterward, all types of Tao methods and true intent related to nothingness flowed into his mind, and Lin experienced all of this and the feeling of quickly becoming more powerful. There was only one word screaming in his heart: "Little Xie is bad *SS. Chapter 2155. And Lin had killed more heavenly gods than he could count on 2 hands. However, he could only absorb 7 heavenly gods. The system didn't help him absorb any more, which was quite a pity to Lin. Only after that did he discover that it wasn't that the system didn't help him absorb the heavenly gods' powers. Instead, the system was filtering out those heavenly gods. In other words, not only was the system not helping him, but it was also causing trouble for him. Of course, there was a reason for this. The system was trying to prevent Lin from absorbing too many heavenly gods' powers and suffering backlash from the heavenly gods' powers. However, Lin's darkness was complete now. After all, he could absorb the power of the heavenly gods without any side effects. In order to become more powerful, this was the only path that he could take. How was he going to get around the system's filtering? This was extremely crucial. Little Xie had once told him that she could block out the system's filtering and help him absorb the heavenly gods' powers in order to increase his Tao power. And Lin didn't believe her initially. The system was so bad *SS. So how could little Xie block out the system's interference? However, he finally realized that he had been wrong. Little Xie wasn't bluffing. She really was bad *SS. And Lin could sense that the heavenly god of nothingness had already fused into his body. Furthermore, his Tao power of darkness had also become more powerful due to the heavenly god of nothingness. That's right, he had become more powerful. This was all due to Little Xie's efforts. Little Xie, you vanquish the heavens and defeat all evil. Ultimate Tao can still be activated on its own. You have the cheek to say that? I saw that you didn't take the initiative to use your ultimate Tao until you killed a heavenly god. So I expended my essential sword power to help you activate this technique. Little Xie's cold, tender, and extremely displeased voice sounded from within the sword. And Lin realized his mistake, and he scratched his head with an apologetic smile on his face. He had made a promise with Little Xie to use vanquish the heavens and defeat all evil. Ultimate Tao to kill a heavenly god. But Lin was too focused on flexing during the actual battle and forgot about his plan. He really had to reflect on this, and Lin was extremely elated. Little Xie really could help him absorb Tao power. Now, many of the ideas he had prepared could be implemented according to the plan. He had to admit that Little Xie had always been a very adorable loli. It was no wonder that he had chosen to keep her as a weapon in his past life. She sure had good foresight. The black net of Tao unleashed by the evil-slaying sword returned to the sword and disappeared. The sword trembled slightly. With a whoosh, it simply turned into a black light and flew back behind Lin. It hovered there quietly as if nothing had happened. And Lin stroked the blade of the sword before injecting a few bursts of divine weapon origin energy into the sword, causing Little Xie to moan in pain. She was finally able to calm down. The battle came to an end, and Lin led the team towards the gate of green light. Yun Menjing and the other big shots follow behind Lin wholeheartedly, and Lin's series of heaven-defying actions gave them a special sense of security. How could they not accomplish something great by following such a big shot? Void, darkness projection. A colorless divine halo suddenly appeared above Lin's head, and he waved it gently toward the green gate of light. A dark shadow began to appear before gradually disappearing into nothingness. This is a shadow clone created by imitating Heavenly God Void God's aura. It's identical to Heavenly God Void God and can perfectly evade the detection of the 2 paramount Heavenly Gods, and Lin explained with a smile. He already possessed the power of the heavenly gods of nothingness, so it was a piece of cake for him to create a similar fake heavenly god, void god, using the paramount heavenly god of darkness. The best thing about heavenly god, void god, was that he was very quiet and aloof. He was a heavenly god who was constantly muttering, "You can't see me, you can't see me, you can't see me." Even if a paramount heavenly god were to appear, he wouldn't bother to say anything. Hence, under normal circumstances, the paramount heavenly gods wouldn't bother communicating with heavenly god, void god. As such, the fake heavenly god, void god created by Enlin would be able to disguise itself very well. All it had to do was remain outside the gate, and it could act as Enlin's spy to observe the outside world. Meanwhile, in a world that was filled with lush greenery, a woman with dreamlike beauty had her dark green hair tied up into a bun. Her orange-red eyes were staring at the huge flower in front of her that was emitting boundless vitality. This flower was very strange. At first glance, it was as if it were taking on a new form every single second. The only thing that didn't change was the breathtaking beauty that even made people sink into it. One flower, one world, one instant, one pagoda. Immeasurable life can create a limitless future. After I refine this immeasurable flower, I'll be able to materialize the 3 phases immeasurable fruit, which will provide the reincarnation core for the 3 phases true heavenly reincarnation formation. This woman, who was so beautiful that all things in the world paled in comparison, was none other than the goddess of life. She had come here to prepare for the 3 heavenly gods to unleash the formation's ultimate weapon. Once the ultimate weapon was formed, there would be no one to fear in this world. The insufferably arrogant, heavenly darkness god would be crushed like an ant by them. Even the evolved heavenly light goddess would not be a match for them. She splayed her hands open, and the green divine halo above her head glowed with a brilliant light that almost engulfed the entire heaven and earth. The lustrous green light was imbued with the paramount laws of nature, and it fused into the immeasurable flower, causing its aura to expand explosively and develop at a rapid rate. "Flower goddess, wonder god, I'll leave my safety in your hands," the goddess of life said in an indifferent voice. "As you wish, he." A demon made of flowers and vines shook her graceful body and nodded obediently, standing next to the life goddess to protect her. He. A monster with lightning in its left hand and flames in its right hand, and its legs were as sharp as divine swords. It had the head of a fiend celestial, and its stomach was filled with chaos. The 2 of them were the goddess of life's personal guardians, and they represented the most powerful beings in the Tao of life. They didn't have the power of the heavenly gods, but they were even more powerful than normal heavenly gods. Not taking into account anything else, even if a paramount heavenly god were to attack, the 2 of them would be able to hold them off for a while. Aside from that, there were all types of rare and exotic flowers and plants in this world, as well as all types of life forms with different functions. Some of them were extremely adorable, while others were unimaginably terrifying. They were all life forms created by the goddess of life. This world was her world of life, and everything here was her little pet. Theoretically speaking, no one would be able to infiltrate this world without anyone noticing. But the goddess of life still brought her most powerful servant here. The goddess of life had thought that everything would go smoothly. However, her expression suddenly shifted drastically after a short while. There were invaders in this world. Chapter 2156. Enlin led the Gods of Destruction team through the gate of the 2 realms smoothly. They had finally arrived at a brand new world. There was a clear blue sky, a boundless green grassland, and a forest. Spiritual aura was abundant, vital energy turned into mist, and countless colorful auspicious auras turned into clouds. A herd of wild lightning horses with elephant legs and horse bodies galloped across the grassland. Their footsteps sounded like rolling thunder. Suddenly, the ground swelled up, and huge purple flower buds bloomed on the grassland. They bit the galloping wild horses in their mouths. Unafraid of the thunder and trampling, and swallowed them into their stomachs. Within the forest, there were little people with butterfly wings playing around in the forest. It was like a forest within a forest, and each of them could use strange magic. In the sky, there were countless heavenly dragons with snake bodies and dragon heads. Occasionally, they would avoid the hunting of mythological beasts that looked like six-winged rocks but had huge whale mouths. One by one, strange life forms appeared in front of everyone. Almost all of them were races that they had never seen before. The only thing that remained unchanged was that they were all very powerful. There was no doubt that this world was a holy land for cultivation. At the same time, it was also a world full of vitality and miracles. And Lin was just about to unleash his divine sense to survey this world when a huge monkey with a sinister, demonic head on its head suddenly appeared from the forest in the distance. It transformed into a bolt of black lightning before turning around and sitting down on Lin's head with its bright red rear. At this moment, it was as if Mount Tai was pressing down on him. Moreover, the moment the bright red buttocks landed, the two halves of the buttocks suddenly opened, revealing the dense and deep black fangs inside. This devil monkey actually ate people with its butt, and Lin sensed for a while and realized that this world was as wide as a greater world. He quickly came to his senses and looked up, only to see a huge mouth pouncing towards him. No, it should be a red, but with a mouth. He frowned slightly. He did not need to do anything at all. A wave of golden energy shot into the sky and crashed into the devil monkey. The devil monkey screamed, and its body froze for an instant. Then it was annihilated into particles. What a wicked creature! And Lin shook his head and looked into the distance. I've already sensed her location. Let's go. As he spoke, he turned into a black shadow that was invisible to the naked eye and sped off into the distance. Michael, Demon Lord Lingu, and the others were only barely able to keep up. Everyone flew in this world, like a space-splitting divine sword. Everywhere they passed, space would be torn apart due to their terrifying speed. A six-winged giant rock that was hunting a heavenly dragon didn't know what had happened, but its body was torn in half by a sudden force. Its flesh and blood turned into a rain of blood, appearing extremely miserable. The heavenly dragons who were fleeing in panic a second ago were even more dumbfounded. After a brief moment of confusion, they looked at the broken bodies falling from the sky, and their eyes became heated. Without saying a word, they opened their bloody mouths towards the broken bodies. From prey, they had become predators, and Lin quickly approached a certain location. He had already sensed her presence. She had definitely sensed his presence as well. He could sense that she was fleeing and constantly on the move. That's good news for me. And Lin's lips curled up slightly. This meant that the goddess of life was afraid of him. Furthermore, she was distracted by something important, and her speed was less than half of the heavenly earth gods. You think you can shake me off with that kind of speed? And Lin chuckled, and his speed increased explosively once again. The battling Buddha and the others really couldn't keep up now. They could only look on as they were left further and further behind by Lin. The story of the hunter and the prey was constantly playing out in this world. However, unbeknownst to the beings of this world, their god of creation was also playing the game of the hunter and the prey. However, the god of creation was playing the role of the prey, and Lin could sense that the distance between them was quickly closing, and he finally caught sight of the heavenly life goddess. She was refining a very strange flower while fleeing with all her might. Beautiful life goddess, we meet again. A smile appeared on Lin's face, but he was pondering how to destroy the flower in the distance. And Lin, how could it be you? How did you know I was here? The goddess of life was even more astonished upon seeing Lin. Others might not know who Lin was, but she was well aware of Lin's true power. This was a terrifying being that even the heavenly earth god was unable to defeat after unleashing his true form of Tao. How could she be any more unlucky than to encounter this god of slaughter during a critical period of refining the immeasurable flower. Why was Lin so persistent? How did I know you were here? I don't know. I was wandering at the bottom of the ocean when I saw a door, so I decided to come in and take a look. So this is your home. As the owner of this place, shouldn't you take good care of your guest? And Lin blinked with a smile. The goddess of life's body trembled with rage upon hearing this. He had clearly come uninvited, yet he was asking her to take care of him? Had he gone insane? Thinking back, the first time they had met was at the Heavenly Human Tribe's breeding grounds. At the time, she had been the dominant figure, while Lin was as obedient as a little white rabbit. Now, this little white rabbit had transformed into a big bad wolf that was trying to kill her. Don't run, life goddess. Aren't you going to buy me a drink or two? Are you busy with your nectar? Do you need my help? And Lin continued to yell at the goddess of life. The goddess of life finally couldn't help but issue a command at the sight of the approaching Lin. Flower goddess, wonder god, take good care of this heavenly darkness god. Yes, great goddess. A voice as clear as a silver bell rang out. In the blink of an eye, a lithe woman constructed from countless flowers and vines appeared before Lin at an incredible speed. She twisted a vine in her hand into a spear before stabbing it viciously toward Lin's chest. Thousand blossoming flowers, withering spear. The spear was unimaginably withering. As soon as the spear appeared, all life within a radius of a few hundred kilometers withered as if their vitality had been stripped away. And Lin felt an unimaginable pain in his chest. The part of his indestructible body that was stabbed by the spear was rotting at a speed visible to the naked eye. Then, the spear began to pierce through. This flower goddess was not simple, and Lin immediately punched toward the flower goddess's face. This punch seemed fast and without any accumulation of power, but if it were to land, even a heavenly god would be severely injured. Puffed, puffed. Flowers are not flowers, mist is not mist. You can't hit me. The flower goddess chuckled, and her body suddenly turned into countless petals. And Lin's fist punched through her body, sending countless flower petals flying through the air. Chapter 2157. And Lin really didn't think that his opponent would be able to dodge his punch. At this moment, a monster with the head of a fiend celestial with lightning in its left hand and flames in its right hand had already appeared behind Lin. It lashed out with both fists, and lightning and flames exploded in unison, creating a massive lightning sun in the air. Boom! And Lin's body was blasted flying by the fists. The power imbued within the heavenly earth god's eruption made him feel as vast and boundless as the heavenly earth gods. And Lin had only just stabilized his body when a crisp voice sounded beside him. TSK, TSKTA, the heavenly darkness god is nothing much. The flower goddess transformed into countless flower petals that enveloped Lin. Each of her flower petals was imbued with a top-tier divine ability. The flower petals landed on Lin's body, and it was as if countless divine abilities had landed mercilessly on his body. His body was engulfed by the boundless divine abilities in the blink of an eye. Did it work? The flower goddess saw the countless flower petals converge, and countless extremely powerful divine abilities were unleashed, bombarding the man in the center. The scene was extremely spectacular, but also extremely cruel. She felt like even a paramount heavenly god would be severely wounded if they were struck by this attack when they were caught off guard. You underestimated us. Now you've suffered. The flower petals materialized into a human figure, and a cold and cruel smile appeared on her face as she looked at the man who was still being bombarded by the divine abilities. However, at this moment, a voice suddenly sounded from the center. Is this the goddess of life's hospitality? The flower petal welcoming ceremony is indeed not bad. The voice was calm and serene, but it struck the flower goddess with an unimaginable chill. Flower is not flower, mist is not mist. The flower goddess immediately transformed into countless flower petals in an attempt to get away. However, in the next instant, the darkness engulfed all of the divine abilities flying toward it. It then expanded like an explosion, engulfing the divine abilities, engulfing the space, engulfing the flower petals, and engulfing everything in its path into nothingness. No, most of the flower petals that the flower goddess transformed into were also engulfed. And Lin walked out from the darkness and looked at the escaping flower goddess with a mocking expression. At this moment, Qi Shen had already appeared in front of Enlin, and his silvery white legs slashed down toward Enlin's neck like a pair of peerless swords. Die. His legs slashed down, and the void was neatly cut into two halves. Two Dao jades suddenly appeared in Enlin's palm. Brother, lend me your fire. And Lin snapped his fingers. Suddenly, the lightning on Wonder God's left arm and the flames on his right arm exploded at the same time. Boom! Qi Shen's left and right arms exploded simultaneously. With a blood-curdling screech, the wondrous god was engulfed by the destructive lightning and flames before he could even finish his attack. Looking down from the sky, it was like a sea of fire and lightning that covered the entire sky. The power it released was even more terrifying than Wonder God's own attack. And Lin was borrowing Wonder God's flames and lightning to kill him. Phew, what beautiful fireworks. Is this also a welcoming ceremony for the goddess of life? I'll accept it then. I like your hospitality. He smiled and continued to chase after the goddess of life. The goddess of life realized that the two guardians had only been able to stall Lin for a short while. While she was shocked, she was also extremely displeased. Petal shower? Fireworks? Nice hospitality? This was blatant mockery and provocation. This is my world. If I wasn't refining the immeasurable flower, why would I retreat and not dare to fight? If this was any other time, I would definitely make sure that you won't be able to return. The goddess of life hated Enlin so much that she gritted her teeth. However, there was nothing she could do. She could only continue to run. Time. What she needed now was time. Seeing Enlin getting closer and closer, a hint of hatred flashed across the goddess of life's face. No, I can't hesitate like this anymore. Enlin, you force my hand. Creation authority. Transfer. Flower goddess, wonder god, stall him for me. The goddess of life roared angrily. Her aura became even weaker. At the same time, a supreme power descended from the sky like holy light. It shone on the charred wonder god and the flower god, who had been corroded by darkness. Instantly, their injuries healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. An aura that was superior to heaven and earth appeared on the two guardians, and Lin's expression changed slightly. At this moment, he felt that two creation gods had suddenly appeared behind him, giving him an extremely strong sense of pressure. A chaotic black shadow tore through the void and caught up to Lin in the blink of an eye. Wonder God's eyes glowed fiercely. His arms of lightning and flames shot toward Lin at the same time. He wanted to pay back the humiliation of blowing himself up. And Lin wanted to use the power of the heavenly fire god and the power of the heavenly lightning god to self-detonate like last time, only to find that his powers of the heavenly gods were completely useless. This was because the power of this entire world was supporting the heavenly god in battle. An entire world was suppressing his powers of the heavenly gods. That's right. This world was declaring its sovereignty. In this world, Wonder God was the highest level of gods, and Lin instantly understood the goddess of life's words. Did the goddess of life make them the supreme gods of this world? Become the gods that controlled everything? All creation gods had a special characteristic. As long as they were in the world they created, their existence was invincible. Everything was under their control. Unless one had the ability to destroy the world they created in one go, there was no way to defeat them. And Lin was still very confused. Wasn't the goddess of life a heavenly god? How could she be able to create a world as a creation god? One had to know that creating a world was the highest form of an intelligent life form. That was clearly something that only cultivators could do. Was she a life form or a supreme, heavenly god? No one could answer Enlin's question. Qi Shen's fist had already landed fiercely. Raging flames and lightning instantly shattered the space within a few dozen kilometers. This time, Enlin really felt a heart-wrenching pain in his chest. His body caved in from the force and energy of Wonder God's fist. With the power of a god of creation and the power of the entire world at his disposal, the power that he could unleash was unimaginably terrifying. Right at this moment, countless withered flowers suddenly fell from the sky. A gargantuan gray tombstone exuding an extremely potent aura of death fell from the sky before crashing into Enlin's head with unerring accuracy. This tombstone was imbued with the power of the entire world, and Enlin felt as if the entire world was being crushed down upon him. Enlin used his divine Tao of darkness without hesitation to devour the tombstone. However, the power of eternal immortality attached to the tombstone was able to resist the invasion of darkness. Not good, boom. Enlin was flattened as he crashed into the ground, pulverizing the earth beneath him. The gray tombstone crushed Enlin into the ground just like that. Countless divine patterns fell from the sky and covered the tombstone. These were the divine seals of heaven and earth. The flower goddess landed gracefully. Countless desolate flower petals fell. The flowers blooming in front of the tombstone are the beauty that you yearned for, she smiled as she looked at the black and white image of Enlin on the tombstone. Withered, vine-hundred flowers gently waved her hand, and countless yellow and white flower wreaths appeared on the tombstone. Chapter 2158. The flower goddess was extremely satisfied with the tombstone before her. Instantly, the ground was filled with vibrant flowers. There were even the chirping of birds and the soaring of immortal sparrows, making this place look like an immortal realm. What a beautiful place! There were free tombstones and free fairyland graveyards. For the heavenly darkness goddess, this could be considered a suitable place to be buried. The flower goddess was extremely confident. The entire world was helping her suppress Enlin. So how was Enlin supposed to escape? Furthermore, there was a black and white photo of Enlin on the tombstone, which meant that she was certain that Enlin was dead. Thus, she was able to use her peerless karma power to erase Enlin's existence and turn Enlin's death into reality. The heavenly life goddess finally heaved a sigh of relief upon seeing Enlin being suppressed. This Ned Enlin had finally been subdued. She wasn't as naive as the flower goddess and didn't think that Enlin would be killed by this technique. However, she would be able to restrict Enlin's movements and give her time to refine him. Flower goddess, wonder god, be careful. Enlin is not that easy to deal with, the heavenly life goddess cautioned after a moment of thought. Don't worry, heavenly goddess. He's dead for sure. The flower goddess felt like in her current state, she could control everything in this world. All the living beings in this world were just ants to her. It's a pity that he died before I had a chance to give him a taste of fear and despair, the wonder god said in disappointment. The life goddess. The two guardians she had created were all good, but they had never seen the world. Once they gained control of too much power, they would easily become arrogant. Oh, how many more are coming to deliver themselves to me? The wonder god licked his fanged lips as he looked up into the sky. A few figures exuding powerful auras approached from afar. They were none other than the battling Buddha, Michael, and the others who had been following behind Enlin but had been mercilessly shaken off by Enlin. Oh well, let this place be their personal graveyard. The goddess of flowers smiled. Her eyes were glistening like peach blossoms. At the same time, the battling Buddhas arrived at the battlefield where Enlin had fought, and they were all stunned by the sight of the gray tombstone, as well as the black and white high-definition photo on the tombstone, as well as the wreaths of different colors. This is Enlin? Could it be that he is dead? No, that can't be. Brother Enlin is so powerful. How could he die just like that? The battling Buddha's eyes had already turned red. and he was clearly convinced. After all, anything could happen in a battle against a paramount heavenly god. And look at the black and white picture on the tombstone. And Lin's death was not peaceful at all. I'm going to avenge brother and Lin. The battling Buddha raised his golden banded staff in a fit of rage, and his body instantly transformed into a massive battle divine monkey. Wait, something's not right. A perplexed expression appeared on Demon Emperor C Yu's face. And Lin is clearly an enemy, so why would the enemy erect a tombstone for Enlin? The battling Buddha's expression faltered upon hearing this. Why would the enemy erect a tombstone for Enlin after killing Enlin? A respectable enemy? Impossible. This must be a trap. However, right at this moment, before they even had a chance to do anything, Wonder God had already appeared before them, and his fists transformed into fiery lightning that crashed toward the gods of Destruction Team. You dare to step into the goddess of life's world when you're this weak. Die, all of you! Boom, boom, boom. Extremely terrifying fists fell. The battling Buddha used his staff to meet Wonder God's fist, but the terrifying power imbued within Wonder God's fist traveled along his staff and almost tore his body apart. Demon Emperor C was also struck by Wonder God's fist, and he was blasted back several hundred kilometers. He immediately pulled out his gourd and gulped down a few mouthfuls of wine to calm himself down. At this moment, Wonder God turned his attacks toward the others, regardless of whether it was Heavenly Son candidate Michael, Yun Menjing, who could suppress heavenly gods, or Demon Lord Lingu, who could crush heavenly gods. None of them were a match for Wonder God. They were either blasted back by a single punch or severely injured after taking 2 or 3 punches. At this moment, not only did Wonder God possess the combat prowess of a god of creation, but he could also rule over this world. Is this all you've got? This isn't even enough for me to warm up. Wonder God looked at the powerful beings who had been forced into retreat with a disdainful smile. Let's not waste any more time. Let's finish them off in one go, the flower god said indifferently. He clearly didn't think much of these powerful beings. The flower god was just about to join Wonder God's battle and finish off his enemies in one go. Right at this moment, a sudden change occurred. Thump! The sound of a heartbeat seemed to resonate with the great Tao of heaven and earth. When the sound fell upon the flower god and Wonder God's minds, they felt an indescribable sense of fear. It was as if they were about to be pulled into a boundless darkness, so dark that they couldn't see any hope. The flower god's expression changed drastically. What's that sound? Then she seemed to have sensed something and suddenly turned to look at the tombstone. At this moment, the suppression runes on the tombstone and the ground suddenly became as black as ink. It was so black that it made people panic. Then it spread in all directions, swallowing the ground, swallowing the flowers, swallowing the tombstone, swallowing everything in its path. Heavenly darkness god? The flower god's body trembled as she cried out, "Not only did you not die, but you also broke free from the suppression? Impossible! This suppression runes used the power of an entire world. How could you break free just like that?" Crack, boom! The tombstone suddenly collapsed, and Lin slowly walked out from the tombstone. He looked at the black and white photo on the collapsed tombstone and grinned. Holy sh*T, what the hell are you doing? You even made a dragon out of my funeral? By the way, can you not make me look so hideous in a black and white photo? Seeing that Enlin had broken free from the suppression runes, the flower god didn't have the time to reply. She immediately attacked Enlin again. Countless vines transformed into an azure with dragon and roared as they pounced toward Enlin. This is the first time I've had a funeral package. I have to say, you've successfully angered me. And Lin sighed lightly and pulled out the evil-slaying sword from his back. Darkness surged onto the blade of the sword, and he slashed toward the flower god. Heaven and earth suddenly darkened. The flower god could only feel that everything in front of her was so dark. She was the god of creation, and she controlled the entire world. But in the face of this darkness, she still felt a sense of despair and powerlessness, because this was a darkness that could even swallow the world. Whoosh! Darkness flashed past. The azure wood dragon disappeared without a sound. Then the flower god's body was also sliced in half by this sword. There was no pause at all. It was as easy as cutting a piece of butter. Chapter 2159. One slash, just one slash. Flower god couldn't even block one slash before he was completely swallowed by the darkness. Flower god! Wonder roared in anger when he saw Flower god's death. He turned around and pounced toward Enlin. The other members of the God of Destruction team could finally heave a sigh of relief. Enlin, it's sect leader Enlin. Brother Enlin, I thought you were dead. It's great that you're still alive. So powerful. He killed one of the gods with one slash. All of the team members were very elated. They had just been engaged in an extremely arduous battle, but all of them felt an indescribable sense of security upon seeing Enlin. Yun Menjing was the first to react. She clutched her chest and said, "Is this what it feels like to rely on someone? I can't believe that I, the Empress of the Dark Elves, would have this kind of feeling for a man. Don't make it sound so ambiguous. You're making things difficult for me." Michael tried his best to maintain his holy and pure appearance. He also had that damned sense of security and dependence. At this moment, Wonder God had already charged in front of Enlin. His expression was ferocious and arrogant, the chaotic mouth on his stomach open wide, and the destructive energy inside could crush anything it touched into a chaotic state. Enlin, I didn't have the chance to let you taste despair last time. Now I'll let you taste what real chi. Wonder God's ferocious expression was still frozen on his face. Countless black lines had already appeared on his face and body. Those were the marks left by extremely sharp swords. Enlin slowly sheathed his sword and shook his head. You talk too much. Wonder God's body shuddered. His body was instantly cut into countless cubes. Then the cubes were swallowed by the darkness at the incision and completely disappeared. One slash, another slash. The Wonder God, who had given the members of the God of Destruction team an immense amount of pressure, had been slain by Enlin with a single sword strike. Only at this moment did they truly realize just how powerful Enlin's combat prowess was. They knew that Enlin had created countless miracles, and they also knew that he possessed the power to defeat the paramount heavenly gods. However, they only had a deeper understanding of Enlin's power after experiencing it for themselves and experiencing it for themselves. Enlin, like this, could take on all 10 of them with one hand. A hint of reverence appeared in everyone's eyes as they looked at Enlin. With such an invincible god of war as their team leader, they felt extremely safe. What the hell? Why was there such a special feeling again? Demon, Lord Ling, Gu, Michael, and the others were stunned for a moment before looking away awkwardly. They definitely couldn't have such a peculiar feeling. It was too strange. Don't just stand there. Let's go after the life goddess, Enlin suddenly said. Everyone nodded in agreement upon hearing this, and their battle intent surged as they chased after Enlin. Enlin was initially planning to transform into a shadow and undergo rapid warp, but a vast number of terrifying vines suddenly appeared out of thin air and bound his body tightly. A burst of heaven and earth crushing power, as if the entire world was imprisoning Enlin's power, appeared at this moment and completely immobilized him. Enlin was very familiar with this power. This was a power that could only be used by gods of creation in their own world. Sure enough, a woman materialized from vines and flowers appeared before glaring at Enlin with resentment in her eyes. How dare you kill me? How dare you kill me? The flower goddess was just about to do something when the darkness tore through the countless vines around Enlin. Then the vines exploded like a ball, engulfing the flower goddess body, which had turned from resentment to horror. Not even a speck of her remained. However, right at this moment, the Wonder God descended from the sky like a bolt of lightning. His feet were the sharpest celestial swords, and he was going to slice Lin in half. The Wonder God's speed was extremely fast, and he didn't waste any words. And Lin hurriedly swung his sword to defend himself. The evil-slaying sword collided with the Wonder God's feet, but it was slashed into the ground by the essential sword intent imbued within the Wonder God's feet. The Wonder God had also been revived, and Lin didn't even have a chance to catch his breath before countless more vines appeared out of thin air and bound toward Lin's body. Each and every one of the vines had been blessed by the will of the world and were imbued with the paramount sealing power. Is there no end to this? And Lin let loose an enraged roar, and the evil-slaying sword on his back rose into the sky as a black sword intent soared into the sky, pulverizing the vines and slicing the Wonder God in half as well. At this moment, the flower goddess had already appeared in the distance. She made a series of hand seals in a frenzy as she prepared to unleash a massive spell technique. And Lin finally understood at this moment that a god of creation was truly invincible in the world they had created. At the very least, he couldn't kill them. They were immortal, and no matter how many times he killed them, this world would revive them. After all, this world was created by them, unless both of them died at the same time. Sect leader Lin, we're here to help you. Michael and the others charged toward the flower goddess in an attempt to interrupt her spell technique. I don't need your help. And Lin immediately stopped them. The battling Buddha wasn't happy to hear this. Brother Lin, don't underestimate our strength. Even though we're not as powerful as you, we can still help you harass and attack your enemies. We can't just come here and be bystanders, right? Of course not. I told you that you don't need my help because I want you to do something else very important. And Lin shook his head. Everyone was elated to hear this. Just tell us what you want us to do. We will definitely go through water and tread on fire, even 10,000 deaths. The members of the God of Destruction team yelled. And Lin looked at the revived Wonder God and spoke in a solemn voice. They're definitely trying to hold me back at all costs. Furthermore, gods of creation are extremely fast in this world, and I won't be able to escape from them. Hence, I'll leave the heavy responsibility of hunting down the life goddess to you guys. I'll be responsible for holding them back. And Lin's voice fell. Everyone's expressions froze. WH, what? You want us to chase after the life goddess? Demon Lord Lingu was astonished. Are you asking us to die? Michael wanted to cry, but no tears came out. He was already regretting what he had said earlier. He had only just uttered those words, and Lin really did want them to risk their lives for him. I said, we're very powerful, but we're not powerful enough to hunt down the life goddess. How arrogant must I be to hunt down the life goddess? The battling Buddha felt like his mind had gone completely blank. There was only one thought in his mind, and Lin was trying to kill him. At this moment, and Lin's darkness had already clashed with the flower goddess's tornado of flowers. Trust me, the life goddess is currently in a critical period of refinement, and her authority as a god of creation has been transferred. She's at her weakest right now, and she's definitely weaker than the flower goddess and the wonder god. It's time for you to display your true strength as members of the God of Destruction team. Chapter 2160. The members of the God-slaying team were a little more confident after hearing Lin's words of encouragement. However, when they thought about the fact that they were going to hunt down a paramount heavenly god, they felt like they had gotten a little too cocky. If they weren't cocky, how would they dare to do something like this? All right, I'll leave this to sect leader Lin. A determined expression appeared on Demon Emperor Siyu's face as he immediately agreed. He even gulped down a few mouthfuls of wine as he spoke. He was already in the zone, and if he was given a few more jugs of wine, he would even dare to chase down a paramount heavenly god in perfect condition. All right, I swear on my title as the heaven-crushing sage that I will kill the heavenly life goddess, even if I have to die. Sun Yukong, gripped his golden-banded staff tightly as he spoke in high spirits. "Seeing as that's the case, I'll leave this to Big Brother and Lin." A faint smile appeared on Yin Menjing's face as countless black vein patterns began to appear on her semi-transparent wings. Her body transformed into a streak of black light as she flashed toward the direction that the goddess of life had fled in. Demon Lord Lingu and Mi Jia Lai also followed suit. They followed the members of the Gods of Destruction team into the distance. They were all determined to die in the pursuit. They had no choice. They were going after a paramount heavenly god, which was a top-tier opponent that they didn't even dare to imagine in the past. Don't even think about interfering with the goddess of life. Qi Shen flew into a rage upon seeing that the members of the god-slaying team were going to chase after the goddess of life. However, when he passed by a certain spatial domain, his body was suddenly engulfed by an invisible power. He let loose a wail of anguish as he hurriedly stopped in his tracks. At this moment, half of his body had already been engulfed by the invisible power, and he was in an extremely sorry state. "Did you ask me if you wanted to chase after them?" And Lin smiled lightly. He had just used the power of nothingness. This kind of power was the easiest to set up when the enemy was defenseless. Myriad flower, heavenly burial. Countless peculiar flower petals fell from the sky, enshrouding Lin's entire body with the essential power of death and decay. A series of chains with malicious ghosts attached to them shot forth from the void and bound Lin's body. A tombstone once again appeared in the sky, falling from the sky. This tombstone was protected by countless flowers, and it seemed to be even more powerful than before. Again, a cold sneer appeared on Lin's face upon seeing this familiar scene. "Flowers bloom in front of the grave," the flower goddess sang softly. However, before she could finish singing, she saw a golden fist approaching from afar, tearing apart and annihilating all the flowers of death. It grew larger and larger in her field of vision until it occupied her entire field of vision, and Lin held the tombstone with one hand and punched her with the other. The terrifying, heaven-crushing true intent that threatened to crush the entire world engulfed her entire body like a boundless tidal wave. Even though she was a god of creation, she was still struck by a sense of horror by this heaven-crushing true intent. Fist of the heavenly Tao. Rumble. Flower god's body was flattened and then torn apart. This was the first time Lin had unleashed the fist of the heavenly Tao after attaining the complete, divine Tao of darkness, and it was much more powerful than he had imagined. The more one understood the heavenly Tao, the more one would know how to crush the heavens. And Lin's heaven-crushing techniques had clearly been elevated to the next level after his successful Tao integration stage. Furthermore, this type of spell technique was exceptionally effective in a world created by a god of creation. He could even crush the heavenly Tao of the Tai Chu continent, let alone the heavenly Tao of a god of creation's world. Ah! The flower goddess let loose a blood-curdling wail as she was crushed into nothingness by the fist of the heavenly Tao. This was the scene of the tragic death of a god of creation, and Lin was still holding the tombstone with one hand, so he tossed it toward the place where the flower goddess had died. He even used a spell technique to materialize a black and white image of the flower goddess' terrified expression before her death. The heavenly Tao was a good cycle, back to the flower goddess. And Lin had initially wanted to offer a flower wreath to the flower goddess, but he decided not to waste any more flowers after thinking that she could still be revived. At this moment, Wonder God transformed into a gust of wind and tried to sneakily evade Lin's detection as he gave chase into the distance. However, Lin's attack was even faster. A dark green light erupted from his fingertip, and a green arrow that could melt even space shot forth before piercing into the center of the gust of wind. Wonder God's body reappeared amid a blood-curdling wail. He had been struck in the back by the arrow, and the poison instantly spread throughout his entire body. This is the most powerful paralysis poison that I've created using my heavenly poison power. It can paralyze a living being's meridians, vital energy, consciousness, everything. And Lin repressed the urge to vomit after unleashing this technique. The heavenly poison god's heavenly poison power had a side effect of vomiting, and Lin was a paramount heavenly god, so he could just barely repress the urge to vomit. However, it was extremely disgusting, which was why Lin rarely used his heavenly poison power. Do you think this little bit of poison can trap me? Wonder God roared with rage. An entire world tremored in response. A boundless amount of green life force energy flowed into his body from all directions, purifying all of the negative effects within his body. If one arrow isn't enough, then I'll use a few more. And Lin aimed his fingertip at Wonder God and unleashed a few more top-grade poison arrows, all of which pierced into his head, heart, abdomen, and limbs. Wonder God howled with anguish again, and even the world-class purification power was temporarily halted as his consciousness was starting to blur from the poison. Look at you. You're a paramount god of a world, but you can't even instantaneously recover. What a disgrace. And Lin shook his head. He discovered that using spell techniques to trap these two gods was much more comfortable than killing them. After all, the energy expended was on a completely different level. And Lin suddenly missed Tina. As a god of creation, Tina was much more powerful than these two gods. She could instantly transform heaven and earth, grant invincibility buffs, instantly revive, and instantly teleport to any location in this world. If Lin were to face her in the divine mirror world, then he would truly be in despair. However, these two gods had become the masters of this world, so why was there such a massive disparity between them? Could it be that these powers were bestowed upon them by the goddess of life, so they couldn't use them perfectly? Just as Lin was thinking this, the revived flower goddess charged toward him from behind. God of creation technique, heavenly hell flower. She let loose a shrill cry as she raised her hands above her head. A black man-eating flower appeared between heaven and earth, hanging upside down in the sky. The flower bud opened, revealing rows of sharp, scarlet teeth. All kinds of creatures were pierced, their tendons pulled out, their souls tortured, and their bodies burned. The entire flower was shrouded in a concept of origin that was filled with madness and despair. This was a true hellflower. Furthermore, this was a hellflower that was imbued with the will and power of the entire world. It was powerful enough to trap and kill any living being. It unleashed a terrifying aura as it descended toward Lin before biting down on him. Chapter 2161. The Life Goddess was still on the run. In the past, she wouldn't have been in such a sorry state. Even a day ago, if Lin dared to come in here, she would have charged up and engaged Lin in battle. She wouldn't have had to do everything she could to stall him. After obtaining her power of God of creation, the two guardians she had created had lived up to her expectations and were able to hold Lin off. This was something to be happy about. However, she was no longer happy about it after a minute. She discovered that there were still pursuers chasing after her. Furthermore, there were a few Tao integration stage cultivators chasing after her. She was a paramount heavenly god, but even a Tao integration stage super mighty figure dared to pursue her? The life goddess was struck by an unprecedented sense of humiliation. In the past, she could kill these Tao integration stage cultivators with a single punch. When had she ever been chased by a bunch of Tao integration stage cultivators? If word of this got out, the paramount heavenly gods would probably lose all face. They've gone too far. They've gone too far. The life goddess gritted her teeth, and she wanted nothing more than to turn around and beat up those Tao integration stage cultivators. However, she managed to repress her emotions in the end. Even though the life goddess wasn't afraid of them in battle, the most important thing now was to refine the immeasurable flower. Let them chase after her. With her speed, they wouldn't be able to catch up to her anyway. Sure enough, the Gods of Destruction team could only chase after her with much difficulty. Even though they were able to close the distance between them, it was an extremely slow process. At this rate, she would be able to refine the immeasurable flower before they could even catch up to her. The life goddess glanced behind her with her orange eyes, and her perfect body under her light green floral dress began to turn, smiling at the people who were chasing after her. "Are you all in such a hurry to die? Get the F***ck out of my world, and you'll still have a chance to live. If I refine the immeasurable flower—" The life goddess licked her upper lip with her little pink tongue in an extremely seductive manner, but a killing intent that could freeze the entire heaven and earth flashed through her eyes. "Then you'll have to stay in this world forever and be played by me." The god of destruction team was shocked by the goddess of life's power, but they were not that stupid. They continued to chase after the goddess of life without hesitation. "You don't know what's good for you." The life goddess was displeased to see that none of the experts were intimidated by her aura. At this moment, the battling Buddha felt like there was enough distance between them, and he suddenly thrust his golden-banded staff toward the life goddess from afar, upon which his aura was instantly elevated to the extreme. "Take this." In an instant, the Jingu Bang shone with golden light. Heaven-crushing true will, which could pierce through the heavens, was unleashed. At the same time, the Jingu Bang was growing at an unimaginable speed. Like lightning and light, it pierced through everything. Even space had to make way for it. That was a speed that could pierce tens of thousands of miles. The battling Buddha unleashed his full power from the get-go as he knew that his opponent was extremely powerful. The speed at which the Rui Jingu Bang erupted at this moment was much faster than the speed at which the goddess of life was fleeing. Soon it caught up with the goddess of life and stabbed straight at her slender body. The goddess of life didn't think that her opponent would possess a spell technique with such a long range. One had to realize that she was still several thousand kilometers away from the battling Buddha. She didn't have time to evade, and she could only evade with the immeasurable flower that was in the process of being refined. This attack was very sudden, but with her current powers, evading it was not an issue for her. However, in the next instant, the battling Buddha's pupils contracted and he roared, "Thicken!" The tip of the Rui Jingu Bang suddenly became extremely thick as soon as the battling Buddha issued his command, and it enshrouded the goddess of life's body once again. It turned out that the battling Buddha was already aware that the goddess of life would evade, so he was holding back and waiting for this moment to unleash a sneak attack. The proud goddess of life was not going to pay any attention to a measly Sun Wukong. Not only was his Rui Jingu Bang expanding, but it was also becoming thicker. She was going to have to pay the price for underestimating him. There was no way for her to evade. She could only stretch out her jade-white palm and slap it, colliding with the extremely thick Jingu Bang that was pressing down like a Vajra Buddha wall. In that instant, she felt as if she could see a golden Buddha that was filled with benevolence and was tall and mighty enough to support heaven and earth, pressing down upon her with its 5 fingers. These 5 fingers were imbued with the 5 elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, and they encompassed the entire heaven and earth, thereby giving her nowhere to evade. This was the technique that had left the deepest impression on the battling Buddha. He had once been suppressed by this technique for 500 years, but who was he? He was Sun Wukong, the Sun Wukong who was capable of creating miracles in the face of adversity. Wasn't this technique very bad *SS? Then I'll learn it. 500 years of enlightenment. 50,000 years of enlightenment. Now he had thoroughly mastered this move and even innovated it, turning it into his own move. Heaven-crushing staff, 5-finger demon suppression, rumble. An unimaginably terrifying power erupted from the tip of the Rui Jingu Bang, and it was as if all of the power within the Rui Jingu Bang had exploded in that instant, sealing off all of the goddess of life's paths of retreat. The goddess of life had never expected such a simple-looking attack to be imbued with such immense power and true intent. She was unable to react in time, and she was knocked back by the Rui Jingu Bang. Then it was as if the Rui Jingu Bang had also slapped her mercilessly into the ground, and it was even about to press her firmly into the ground. "You're courting death." The goddess of life had never been suppressed by a slap before. This was an extreme humiliation to her. A red light suddenly flashed in her orange eyes, and the extreme power of death instantly tore the golden Buddha Tao realm before her into pieces. Even the tip of the Rui Jingu Bang began to warp and dim, and all of its power instantly dissipated. She had broken through Sun Wukong's most powerful suppression technique, but she was still delayed. The powerful beings of the God of Destruction team were extremely powerful, and the battling Buddha had bought them a moment, which was enough for them to drastically shorten the distance between them and the goddess of life. The already completely drunk demon emperor Siyu was the first to reach the goddess of life, and his unfathomable drunken demon fists rained down upon her like a series of crimson meteors. The goddess of life was unable to ignore demon emperor Siyu's attacks. This level of attack had already reached the threshold of the God of Creation stage, and it was enough to pose a threat to her. Her body flashed rapidly as she evaded Demon Emperor Siyu's torrential attacks. She lightly stomped her foot onto the ground, and countless vines rose from the ground like swimming dragons to accurately capture the elusive Demon Emperor Siyu. However, before she could even heave a sigh of relief, Michael was already slashing toward her from behind with his holy sword in hand. The goddess of life turned around and slapped her palm toward Michael. It was also at this moment that her killing intent surged. Secret Night Strike, Final Shadow Command. Yun Menjing suddenly appeared in front of the immeasurable flower, and her hand pierced into the immeasurable flower like a bolt of lightning. That's right, her target wasn't the goddess of life, but the immeasurable flower that she had refined. The more important something was to her enemy, the more she wanted to destroy it. No. The goddess of life's eyes widened in shock. By the time she realized what was happening, it was already too late for her to save the immeasurable flower. Shock and fury finally appeared on her face. Chapter 2162. Yun Menjing was the Dark Knight Fairy Monarch, and she ranked #1 among the heavenly disciple candidates. Her forte lay in combat and assassination. If she unleashed her full power, even a heavenly god would be insta-killed if they were caught off guard, let alone an immeasurable flower. Yun Menjing's final shadow token tore through the green light that the heavenly life goddess had used to refine the immeasurable flower before stabbing into the core of the immeasurable flower. The immeasurable flower had immeasurable weight and immeasurable state. However, Yun Menjing's final shadow token represented the end of eternity. No matter how many states there were, it had to end them all at once. The layers of immeasurable flower states were disappearing. The glowing flower petals were withering at a rate discernible to the naked eye. No, the life goddess turned around frantically. Ignoring the attacks of the others, she directly pounced toward Yun Menjing, who was in front of her, and slapped her palm toward her. Yun Menjing wanted to instantly destroy the immeasurable flower, but to her surprise, the immeasurable flower's life force was even more terrifying than she had imagined. At this moment, the life goddess palm was already upon her. The 5 fingers were pressed together, and they were extremely beautiful. However, she felt as if the entire heavens were roaring and burning with rage. Yun Menjing knew that if she didn't defend herself, she could be killed by that palm. Without thinking, she hurriedly raised her hands in front of her. Boom! Energy exploded, and layers of enormous force came crashing down, directly blasting her away. The life goddess protected the immeasurable flower with all her might, but the attack from behind was already upon her. Demon Emperor Siyu's intoxicated demonic fist struck her back, making her feel as if her entire body was being torn apart. Mi Jia Lai's holy light tore through her light green floral dress and left a crimson gash on her flawless skin. Demon Lord Ling tossed a red demonic ball into the life goddess's head, transforming the area within a radius of several hundred kilometers into a realm of destruction. A few seconds later, a woman holding a giant flower flew out of the explosion in a sorry state. Her extremely beautiful face was slightly burned, and her body was also covered with wounds of various sizes. She looked especially sorry. All of the gods of destruction team were a little dazed upon seeing this. He injured the life goddess just like that? It seemed that, and Lin was right. The goddess of life's current state was indeed very weak. She was even weaker than her two guardians. Pooh! While flying, the life goddess suddenly vomited a mouthful of blood, and her aura weakened even more. Obviously, her internal injuries were extremely serious. The internal injuries weren't caused by them. Rather, it was caused by the fact that the immeasurable flower had almost been destroyed while the life goddess was refining it, resulting in a severe backlash. Even the immeasurable flower's source was heavily damaged. The life goddess' eyes widened, and she looked at the flower in front of her with incredulity as she fled, as if she still couldn't accept this reality. One had to know that she would not be able to recover in a short period of time if her life force was severely damaged. This would directly affect the power of the tripartite, true, heavenly reincarnation formation formed by the three supreme heavenly gods. The trump card that she had carefully prepared, the trump card that she had bestowed upon her with boundless hope, had been destroyed by a bunch of Tao integration stage little brothers. One could only imagine how furious and devastated she was. Preposterous! You are challenging my bottom line. The life goddess' entire body was trembling with rage, and the flames of fury burning in her eyes seemed to be able to incinerate everything in the heavens. And Lin had killed her most perfect masterpiece and chopped down her favorite plant, and that had already infuriated her to the point where she was about to start doubting her life. Now, just as she was preparing her final trump card, he suddenly launched a sneak attack to ruin her plans and sent a few minions to hunt her down. She was about to explode on the spot after being insulted and humiliated over and over again. Eat this, demonic woman! Sun Wukong arrived again, and his staff extended and thickened before crashing down toward the fleeing life goddess. The life goddess suddenly stopped in her tracks before turning around and raising a hand. The staff came crashing down with unimaginable force, and even the space around it was twisted into a circular arc. However, it was stopped in its tracks by a fair palm. Boom! A shock wave exploded forth. Sun Wukong's hands were numb from the recoil from the golden-banded staff. What? His expression faltered as he discovered that the life goddess had caught his full-force staff strike without moving in the slightest. Then she was looking at him with a pair of extremely terrifying eyes. He had always been a fearless person, not afraid of the Celestial Emperor, not afraid of Guanyin, not afraid of Buddha. But at this moment he felt a chill run down his spine because of a woman's gaze. The life goddess raised her eyes. She was clearly the most beautiful face that everyone had ever seen. But at this moment, her anger and ferocity made it impossible for anyone to appreciate her at all. "I've decided," she spoke indifferently as she slowly clenched her 5 fingers. The golden-banded staff trembled violently, and there was a cracking sound. Countless golden cracks appeared on the golden-banded staff and quickly spread across its surface. Sun Wukong was startled and widened his eyes. "My staff? Your staff?" The life goddess sneered. "No, you don't have your staff anymore." The life goddess clenched her hand hard, and a golden light suddenly shone between heaven and earth. Then there was the sound of something exploding, and the huge staff was squeezed into countless golden fragments. "No, my golden-banded staff." Sun Wukong finally felt an unimaginable sadness. It was the sadness of a fighting friend leaving him. At this moment, the life goddess had already grasped this opportunity and pressed Sun Wukong into the ground. Life seal! A green celestial sword fell from the sky and pierced into Sun Wukong's chest. Immediately afterward, it was as if Sun Wukong's life had been frozen. His aura disappeared, and his movements were frozen. He was like a lifelike statue. Even his expression of sadness had been frozen. At this moment, Demon Lord Ling Gu and Demon Emperor Si Yu's attacks had already arrived. Demon Emperor C, Yu was responsible for attacking the life goddess, while Demon Lord Lingu's attacks were locked onto the immeasurable flower. They had also realized that the immeasurable flower was the life goddess's biggest weakness. They had to target it. However, to their surprise, the life goddess clenched her hand and shrunk the immeasurable flower to the size of her palm. Then she opened her mouth and swallowed it. Holy F asterisk CK. The two true demon tribe, super mighty figures cursed in their hearts. They really didn't think that the life goddess could do this. If she swallowed her own weakness, wouldn't there be no weakness left? There was no problem with this method. At this moment, the attacks of the two Tao integration stage demons had already landed. However, they were easily blocked by the life goddess with her hands. Her body didn't even move in the slightest. A cold light flashed in the life goddess' eyes, and a smile appeared on her face. I've decided, since the refinement has already been interrupted, I might as well make the best of it. I'll delay the refinement and kill all of you annoying flies first. Chapter 2163. Dark clouds obscured the moon and stars. Darkness was the main theme of the Tai Chu continent. The heavenly sea god stood silently at the center of the white nectar sea, monitoring everything above. The heavenly heaven god was situated in the clouds, monitoring everything in the sky. The two of them were the true core scouts of the heavenly human tribe base camp. Both the sky and the ocean were monitored by absolute power, and no insect would be able to trespass into their territory. They had the confidence to do so. I wonder when the refinement of the life goddess will be completed. An expression of anticipation appeared on the heavenly sea god's face. Once it's done, we won't have to fear anyone anymore, right? Of course, as long as we can unite as one, regardless of whether it's darkness, light, or any other gods of creation on the Tai Chu continent, all of them will be stomped into the ground by us. The heavenly heaven god was in a good mood, and a warm smile appeared on his face. The three-phase true heavenly reincarnation formation is an ultimate weapon that the life goddess and I developed together. It perfectly incorporates the will of the heavenly Tao, the miracle of life, and the infinite cycle of reincarnation. As such, we need 3 paramount heavenly gods to maintain the formation. We were wondering where to find a 3rd paramount heavenly god. Who would have thought that Brother C would know that joining us is the right choice? The heavenly sea god spoke with a serious expression. Everything is for the heavenly Tao. The heavenly heaven god nodded. Everything is for the world. The two deities looked at each other and smiled, looking as if they were fighting for the same ideals. By the way, the heavenly darkness god might sneak in tonight. The heavenly heaven god seemed to have thought of something. Hee. The heavenly darkness god doesn't dare to sneak in here. Isn't he afraid of being surrounded by 3 paramount heavenly gods? The heavenly sea god wasn't worried at all. He knew Enlin very well, and he definitely wouldn't attack unless he had absolute confidence. Besides, he had reminded Enlin that the heavenly light goddess was currently in a weakened state, so perhaps Enlin was looking for trouble with her. Why would he come to them? The heavenly heaven god thought about it for a moment and also felt that it was quite unlikely. The defenses of their nest were impenetrable. If Enlin really did come here to fight, it was absolutely confident that it would be able to kill him. Enlin was most likely tired of living, which was why he dared to come here. Enlin's life explosion technique was indeed very powerful. It was unbelievably powerful, but did Enlin dare to use it? After a series of deductions, the heavenly heaven god was able to determine that Enlin only had one self-detonation opportunity left. When Enlin's body exploded, they couldn't beat him, but they could run. And if Enlin were to use that self-detonation technique, he would be dead. Would someone like Enlin, who cherished his life so much, take the risk to do such a thing? With this in mind, the heavenly heaven god was even more reassured. Of course, the investigation still had to continue. This way, even if Enlin came, they would have enough time to deal with him, right? Time continued to pass slowly. Everything was calm and peaceful. Dark clouds covered the sky. Suddenly, a ray of moonlight shone through the gaps in the clouds and onto the divine tree. The moonlight was not white in color. Instead, it was tinged with a hint of dark red. Unbeknownst to the two paramount gods, a slender figure suddenly appeared in the shadows of the divine tree's lush foliage. She wore a tight-fitting black gauze dress, and her eyes were as red as blood. Even the black gauze dress was unable to conceal her fair and tender skin. Her delicate and beautiful face was filled with indifference and loftiness, as if she was the only existence in the world that could enter her eyes. "I'm still not used to this body." The paramount heavenly gods can all sense one another. In particular, my heavenly god attribute is as bright as the sun in the darkness of the night. If I had come here with my previous body, I would have been discovered, no matter how much I tried to conceal my aura. A faint smile appeared on the woman's face. However, they would never have thought that I, the heavenly light goddess, would become the moonlit night monarch, the blood moon goddess of the night. That's right. She was the heavenly light goddess who everyone thought was hiding in the eastern heavenly gate, silently undergoing a transformation and becoming more powerful. No one would have thought that she would come to the enemy's base in her weakened state before her transformation was complete. Furthermore, she had even managed to evade the detection of all the heavenly gods. In reality, was she at her weakest state? Not really. However, her transformation was not complete, so this was not her most powerful state. In terms of combat prowess, her current state was about the same as before her transformation. So why did she come here? It was naturally because she knew that she was weak, but she knew that these three enemies were even weaker. It could be said that she was at her weakest state. Everyone knew that the heavenly sea god had yet to recover from his severe injuries. However, through her light factor deduction technique, she could even sense that the heavenly life god had left this world to prepare a very important spell technique. This explained why the three heavenly gods didn't interfere with her transformation. It wasn't as simple as driving the tiger to devour the wolf. They also needed time to prepare. This was an opportunity. The heavenly light goddess instantly understood that this was the most important moment for her to turn the tables. She had to foil the three heavenly gods' plans. Otherwise, her chances of victory in the future would be extremely slim. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. She unleashed her moon perception, and she knew that her divination was correct. The heavenly god above the divine tree was the paramount heavenly god of the sky. The ocean below the divine tree was the paramount heavenly god of the sea. However, the paramount heavenly life god was nowhere to be found. The black-haired woman pressed a hand against the greenish-yellow tree trunk, and her crimson eyes shone with a faint light as she looked down the branch of the divine tree into the deepest part of the white nectar sea. Is she at the bottom of the sea? There's an independent world down there. So, is it better for me to force out the true form of a supreme heavenly god, or to disrupt the goddess of life's secret plan? The woman didn't say whether she could do this or not. Instead, she was hesitating over which path to take. If I force out the true form of a paramount heavenly god, then I'll have to retreat. Once that time passes, the heavenly life god will most likely complete their trump card. If I want to disrupt the heavenly life god's plan, then I'll have to force my way through the gate between the two worlds with the ocean present. When that time comes, even though I'll be able to seize the opportunity to disrupt their plan, there's a very high chance that I'll be surrounded by the three paramount heavenly gods and be forced to reveal my true form. As for trying to sneak into the gate between the two worlds without the other party knowing, there was no way such a person existed in this world. The heavenly light goddess didn't even dare to think about it. Did she really think that the three paramount heavenly gods were pushovers? Apart from scouting the ocean and the sky, they wouldn't leave any tricks up their sleeves. In any case, the heavenly light goddess didn't believe that. So the question was, what should she do? Just as she was hesitating, all of a sudden, something unexpected happened. Chapter 2164. The white nectar sea suddenly began to surge. The heavenly sea god's enraged voice suddenly sounded from above the ocean. Something's wrong. Something's very wrong. What's wrong with this situation? The heavenly heaven god's voice sounded from above. The heavenly sea god asked in an urgent voice, "Do you still remember heavenly god Su Wu's hobby?" "Of course I remember. He really likes to eat fish," the heavenly heaven god replied in an indifferent voice. He clearly didn't know what the heavenly sea god was getting at. Yes, he likes to eat fish, especially dried fish. The heavenly sea god said, "I had nothing better to do today, so I continued to throw dried fish at heavenly god void god. But guess what happened? It didn't form a life form to eat the dried fish. Instead, it used its power of nothingness to turn the dried fish into nothingness." The heavenly heaven god. That's all. Isn't this abnormal? The heavenly sea god was extremely excited. This is not in line with heavenly god Su Wu's personality. Maybe he's just tired of eating it? Besides, it still has its incorporeal ability, which can serve as a defensive and warning mechanism. What are you worried about? The heavenly heaven god felt like the heavenly sea god was a complete joke. The heavenly sea god's mouth gaped open, and he felt like this was a little difficult to refute. However, he felt like something was amiss, and he still persisted. Then why doesn't it eat dried fish? What other people want to eat is none of your business. The heavenly sea god was getting a little impatient. He felt like the heavenly sea god was just bored out of his mind. Was this something a paramount heavenly god should be doing? Why didn't he pay attention to the enemy's movements? Why didn't he pay attention to how to improve himself? Why did he have to waste his energy on these minor details? The heavenly sea god was a little reluctant to give up, and he tossed another pile of dried fish toward the gate between the two realms. However, all of them were engulfed by an invisible power as soon as they approached the gate between the two realms. In the past, Empyrean God had transformed into a comical human with a very large mouth for the sake of eating dried fish. Empyrean God's life was very empty. He needed dried fish to replenish his life. Previously, in order to eat dried fish, it even gave up its unfathomable image. How could it give up such an important hobby just like that? The heavenly sea god was perplexed. He felt that he had missed a crucial point. Don't think too much about it. Focus on investigating the surroundings. At this crucial moment, you can't drop the ball. We'll be guarding the divine tree tonight. Even microscopic organisms won't be able to enter our domain, the heavenly heaven god said in a slow voice. The heavenly sea god knew that he couldn't screw up. But what if he had already screwed up? Although it was a small matter, it still gave him a sense of unease. There weren't many beings that could make him feel uneasy. The few gods of creation on the Tai Chu continent could just barely do so, as can Lin and the heavenly light goddess. But it was impossible for them to come here without anyone noticing. No. The heavenly sea god's body suddenly shuddered, as if he had suddenly realized something. Why is it that whatever I think must be what I think? Don't be limited by your own knowledge. The heavenly sea god suddenly came to a realization. It had to send a voice transmission to Enlin to confirm his current location. That's right, sending a voice transmission to Enlin could also be used to scout the enemy's situation. The heavenly sea god immediately used his heart of the ocean to try and establish a connection with Enlin. However, something astonishing happened. The heart of the ocean was unable to establish a connection with Enlin. It could only transmit a single message. Sorry, the person you have dialed is not within the service area. What did he mean by not being in the service area? Its service area was the entire Tai Chu continent, so if he wasn't within the service area, then he had already left this world. Why would Enlin suddenly leave the Tai Chu continent tonight? Where could he go after leaving the Tai Chu continent? The heavenly sea god turned toward the gate between the two worlds, and a chill ran down his spine. It couldn't be, was this a coincidence or was he really in there? If Lin really was in there, that would explain the strange feeling he was having. It would also explain Heavenly God Su Wu's strange behavior, even though it was very inconceivable. It was very likely that this Heavenly God Su Wu was a fake. But how was he supposed to tell the Heavenly Heaven God about this? What if the Heavenly Heaven God asked him why he had Lin's contact information? How was he supposed to explain that? The Heavenly Sea God was quite distressed, but he knew that he couldn't afford to hesitate. Time was of the essence, and the Heavenly Life God's refinement absolutely couldn't be interrupted. Heavenly God, I feel like there's something amiss here. My language of the ocean detected a sinister aura from the north, and that aura is resonating with the space around the gate between the two worlds. The Heavenly Sea God couldn't find a reason, so he could only make up a story. Sinister aura from the north? You mean Lin? The Heavenly Heaven God wasn't familiar with the ocean, so he didn't dare to make a judgment on the Heavenly Sea God. It's very possible. I can only sense that something is amiss, and Lin is more powerful than we imagined, and he might have evaded our detection. I have to test this Heavenly God Su Wu to see if he's still the same Heavenly God Su Wu. The Heavenly Sea God spoke with a grave expression. Well, the Heavenly Heaven God hesitated. Heavenly God Su Wu was a subordinate of the Goddess of Life. If they tried to kill his subordinate without any evidence, wouldn't that be a slap to the Goddess of Life's face? What if Heavenly God Su Wu was completely fine, but the ocean forced him to go on strike? The Heavenly Heaven God didn't agree, nor did he object. The Heavenly Sea God knew that time was of the essence, so he took it as a tacit agreement. He immediately waved his arms toward Heavenly God Su Wu, and boundless ocean pressure crashed toward the gate between the two worlds. The power of the entire White Nectar Sea was being drawn upon by the Heavenly Sea God, and the liquid in the core of the sea was even glowing with an eternal golden light. Su Wu continued to devour, but the amount of seawater surging toward him was simply too terrifying. The seawater, which was imbued with the paramount power of the heavenly gods, made him feel extremely bloated. In particular, the golden seawater was giving him indigestion, and it was constantly crashing into the space around him. PFFF. Su Wu was suddenly blasted apart by seawater. A cloud of black mist exploded outside the gate between the two worlds before completely disappearing. The Heavenly Sea God and the Heavenly Heaven God both drew a sharp intake of breath upon seeing this. Why was it black mist? Heavenly God Su Wu had been attacked, so why wasn't he saying anything? At this moment, both of the utmost beings thought of a possibility that was extremely shocking to them. An enemy had already entered the gate between the two worlds. Right at this moment, the gate between the two worlds suddenly lit up. A monster with a massive pink flower on its head and a six-legged demonic body ran out from the gate between the two worlds before exclaiming with ecstasy, "I'm finally out!" I didn't die. I wasn't killed by an invisible power as soon as I came out. I can finally report this to the paramount heavenly gods. In contrast to the monster's elation, the two paramount heavenly gods had fallen into a deathly silence, unable to bring themselves to smile. Chapter 2165. The emptiness of the two-realm gate was not emptiness God at all. This was a fake heavenly god Su Wu. Not only was he trying to deceive the two paramount heavenly gods, but he was also trying to kill all of the living beings who had come from the Goddess of Life's world to inform him of this. What a killing two birds with one stone! To think that he would screw both us and the Goddess of Life over. A thunderous rumble erupted in the sky. At this moment, the monster that had escaped from the gate of the two realms was already yelling at the top of its lungs. Hua Xianfeng of the 108 living beings of the Goddess of Life, I have an urgent matter to report to the paramount heavenly God. As soon as its voice fell, a water humanoid constructed from a deep blue liquid appeared before Hua Xianfeng with a dark expression. I am the sea god. What happened in there? Hua Xianfeng immediately fell to his knees with tears streaming down his face. Heavenly Sea God, bad news. The Heavenly Darkness God has led a group of Tao integration stage powerful beings into the Goddess of Life's world in an attempt to foil her refinement plan. The two paramount heavenly gods were both astonished upon hearing this. It really was Enlin. Even though they were already mentally prepared, they were still struck by a sense of incredulity and absurdity. How did Enlin know that the heavenly life goddess was going to refine the immeasurable flower today? And how did he manage to sneak into the gate of the two realms? Was he really that unfathomable and invincible? They had just said that not even a single microscopic organism could enter, but reality had just given them a tight slap in the face. Not only had Enlin entered, but he had also brought a bunch of Tao integration stage powerful beings with him, and the Heavenly Sea God and the Heavenly Sea God were completely oblivious. We have to reinforce them right away. By the way, is the Goddess of Life all right? And Lin is trying to foil her plan. Did she try to stall Enlin? The Heavenly Sea God suddenly asked. And Lin is being held back by her guardians. Hua Xianfeng replied. The two paramount heavenly gods heaved a sigh of relief upon hearing this. Thankfully, things were not as bad as they had thought. However, her refinement process of the immeasurable flower was disrupted by those Tao integration stage cultivators. The immeasurable flower's essence was severely damaged, and the life goddess also suffered a backlash. Hua Xianfeng continued. The heavenly heaven god. The heavenly sea god felt a rush of dizziness. The two gods experienced the feeling of falling from the mortal world to hell, flying from hell to heaven, and falling from heaven to hell again. The heavenly sea god really wanted to slap Hua Xianfeng to death. Can't you *King finish your sentence at once? It's too late to say anything now. Let's go in immediately. And Lin dared to ruin our plan. We'll definitely make sure he doesn't return alive. The heavenly heaven god's head suddenly appeared at the bottom of the ocean, and an unimaginably terrifying aura burst forth. Even the powerful Hua Xianfeng collapsed to the ground and trembled uncontrollably. He didn't dare to move or speak. I really didn't expect that Enlin would really dare to do it. Is he not afraid of death? Let's go in and kill him right now. The heavenly sea god was truly enraged. He really didn't think that Enlin would dare to do something like this. He had almost fooled the two paramount heavenly gods, and most importantly, he had successfully foiled their plan. Whoosh whoosh. Two streaks of light imbued with boundless killing intent flew toward the gate between the two realms. They were going to make Enlin pay. However, right at this moment, a crimson moon suddenly tore through the clouds. The long-awaited sight of the twin moons in the sky appeared once again. A dark red saber projection suddenly tore the entire white nectar sea in half. The extreme sharpness of the saber projection sliced through the ocean before striking the bottom of the ocean. If it weren't for the fact that the heavenly sea god and the heavenly sea god had stopped in time, this attack would have struck them with unerring accuracy. The heavenly sea god and the heavenly heaven god had no choice but to evade this attack as they sensed an extremely dangerous premonition. Boom! The saber projection sliced through the seabed, and a deep, dark fissure was sliced open. Who dares to stop me? The heavenly heaven god roared with rage. Before the dark red moon energy had even dissipated, a beautiful black figure slowly appeared. This was an exquisitely beautiful woman with long black hair that extended all the way down to her bare feet. She walked out from the fissure of energy, and the most eye-catching thing about her was the crimson crescent scythe hovering behind her. There was a boundless divine light imbued within her eyes as she looked at the two heavenly gods before her with a mocking expression. The two paramount heavenly gods were both a little dumbstruck at the sight of this woman. "Who are you?" The heavenly sea god asked with a grave expression. "What, you don't recognize me now that I've changed my face?" The woman looked at the heavenly sea god with a hint of a smile on her face. "You're the Dark-Winged Tribe's moonlit night monarch?" The heavenly heaven god's expression shifted upon seeing this. Didn't you already perish? No, it's definitely not her. Even if the moonlit night monarch didn't perish, there's no way she could be this powerful. The heavenly sea god shook his head as he looked at the woman before him. For some reason, he was struck by a sense of extreme danger. That's all right. You'll soon find out who I am. The black-haired woman turned to the heavenly sea god with a meaningful smile. Who would have thought that Lin would be so powerful? He's even faster than me and has foiled your plans. That's good news. I was struggling to decide which choice to make, but there's no need to think about it now. I'll just have to choose to take your lives. Right at this moment, an extremely terrifying pressure suddenly crashed toward the woman from either side. Two massive palms viciously swatted toward the center, as if they were swatting a tiny black mosquito. Insolence! Great heavenly cloud palms. Boom! The two palms fell. The paramount heavenly god unleashed its full power. The seawater within a radius of over 500 kilometers was compressed into a vacuum. Hua Xianfeng was also severely wounded by the shockwaves from the sudden attack. However, when the attack subsided, a semi-transparent red moon barrier constructed from the energy of the true moon had already enshrouded the woman's body, thereby allowing her to remain completely unscathed in the face of the heavenly heaven god's attack. The heavenly heaven god's expression shifted drastically. There was still a being in this world who could remain unscathed after taking a full-force attack from the heavenly heaven god. At this moment, the heavenly sea god had already summoned countless tons of seawater to crash down upon the woman. The seawater was imbued with the paramount power of the law of corrosion, and everything in its wake was reduced to sand and sand. The black-haired woman reached behind her and gripped onto her scythe. In that instant, it was as if a crimson crescent moon had appeared at the bottom of the ocean, slicing all of the seawater in its wake in half. The heavenly sea god's heart jolted. At this moment, the black-haired woman had already appeared before the heavenly sea god at an incredible speed. The crescent moon scythe in her hand had already appeared behind the heavenly sea god, and the sharp blade of the scythe instantly slashed toward his neck. Heavenly golden wall. An indestructible wall of the ocean suddenly appeared behind the heavenly sea god. The wall of water appeared to be very thin, but it was imbued with the boundless power of the ocean, thereby nullifying all attacks. Sure enough, the sharp scythe crashed into the wall of water, but it was unable to break through the wall of water. However, the heavenly sea god didn't even have a chance to heave a sigh of relief. An unimaginable light suddenly erupted from the blade of the scythe. This was a light that was capable of piercing through and purifying all things. The heavenly golden wall had been torn apart. This was because his opponent's attack was powerful enough to tear apart the entire ocean. The heavenly sea god suddenly realized who his opponent was, and an expression of shock appeared on his face. However, he didn't even get a chance to finish a sentence before his head was sliced off by the scythe. Chapter 2166. The woman in the black dress severed the heavenly sea god's head. She was not satisfied, and she still wanted to stab him a few more times. However, at this moment, an omnipresent power that was even more vast and boundless than the ocean appeared and crashed into her back, sending her flying for several hundred kilometers. A gigantic head of white clouds and mist stared intently at the woman. "Heavenly light goddess, it's actually you." Its voice was filled with rage and astonishment. "It's me. What are you surprised?" The woman turned around with a faint smile as she wiped the blood from the corners of her lips. The heavenly heaven god's attacks were all-encompassing, so there was no way for her to dodge. As such, she could only take the attacks head-on. "I'm very surprised that you've fallen, light goddess. You're no longer a high and mighty being filled with hope and future. Your body is now filled with impurities." The heavenly heaven god spoke in a complex voice. The woman in the black dress looked down at her snowy white skin, which was so beautiful that it didn't seem like a mortal being. How am I filled with impurities? This body is very beautiful and very clean. As long as there is light in your heart, then everything will be flawless. Light. Who would have thought that you would still choose this path? A water, humanoid materialized in the distance. It was none other than the decapitated heavenly sea god. That's right. I have to admit that the method you developed to return the powers of the heavenly gods to living beings on the Tai Chu continent is extremely beneficial for improving one's combat prowess. The heavenly light goddess lips curled up into a faint smile. It's a pity that you gave the power of the heavenly gods to life, while I gave the power of life to the heavenly gods. That's the difference in intelligence. The heavenly sea god shuddered upon hearing this. Lan Xiaoni didn't listen to him, and she even smashed his door. This was the most painful experience of his life, and it could be said that he had been thoroughly humiliated. The goddess of light's words were clearly making fun of him. The heavenly sea god clenched his fists in rage. Bai Chonghai roared with rage. This was his majestic will, a will that could affect the entire world. He wanted to attack, but he quickly calmed himself down, and a smile appeared on his face. Light, I know you hate me, but I had no other choice. Didn't you come here to ruin our plan? Now, let me tell you, you've succeeded. We can't fight against you at all. However, Enlin is different. Enlin's potential is extremely terrifying. If you don't stop him, he will definitely grow into your greatest threat. Why don't we shake hands and make peace first, then join forces to deal with Enlin? As soon as these words came out, the goddess of light, who had maintained a calm smile, was startled. The heavenly heaven god took a meaningful glance at the heavenly sea god. The heavenly sea god's enemies were already here to exact revenge, but he still had the courage to invite his enemies to join forces against another enemy. The heavenly sea god sure was shameless. More importantly, the reason he gave was so reasonable. The heavenly heaven god only wanted to say, "Awesome." This kind of operation could only be done by someone who had achieved great things. A smile appeared on the heavenly light goddess face. Seeing you like this, I seem to understand why you betrayed us. What do you think of my suggestion? The heavenly sea god asked. I refuse. The heavenly light goddess replied without hesitation. The heavenly sea god was a little perplexed. Why would you refuse? You should know that cooperating with us now is the best way to get rid of one of our greatest obstacles in the future. I don't have that many reasons. I refuse because I feel like I'll feel better if I beat you up first. The woman raised her crimson moon scythe again. I have absolute confidence in killing you and Enlin, so I don't need to cooperate with you. She charged toward the heavenly sea god as she spoke. F***CK. She's insane. The heavenly sea god's expression shifted drastically, and he immediately unleashed the power of the white nectar sea toward the woman. The white nectar sea was the central sea of the Tai Chu continent, and it possessed the core power of the ocean. The heavenly sea god could utilize this power to the fullest, so the woman was facing unimaginable pressure. However, the woman wielding the scythe continued onward toward the heavenly sea god with unstoppable force. The true intent of the red moon imbued within the scythe was only the surface. What was even more terrifying was the power of light imbued within the scythe. Even for the heavenly sea god, this was extremely terrifying. Help me, heavenly sea god! The heavenly sea god yelled. Needless to say, the heavenly heaven god opened his mouth, upon which a circular spatial cannon shot forth from his mouth. This was not a simple spatial cannon. Instead, it was a top-notch spatial cannon that could split countless dimensions. It had the ability to slice, confuse, annihilate, and collapse dimensions. However, what the heavenly heaven god didn't expect was that the woman was able to slice the spatial cannon in half with a single slash of her scythe. All of the cracks and collapses in the dimension were reduced to stable particles of light by the golden light of her blade. This cold and gentle-looking woman, on the surface, was the moon goddess who dominated the night and slaughtered. But in reality, She was the great goddess of light and justice. These two extremely contradictory characteristics were perfectly fused together in this woman's body. I'm going to kill you, but I'm doing this for your own good as I'm purifying you. The goddess of light's power was extremely domineering, and she tore through the heavenly heaven god's attack before charging toward the heavenly sea god like an invincible goddess of war. Myriad realms, divine source, golden sea of swords. The heavenly sea god took advantage of the split second the heavenly heaven god had bought to materialize billions of terrifying golden swords in the ocean. At first glance, it looked like a golden ocean, shining with dazzling sword light. They transformed into countless streaks of destructive golden light that surged toward the woman in black. Each and every one of them possessed the paramount true intent of the ocean, which was enough to strike fear into the hearts of all powerful beings. Now that countless golden ocean swords had converged together, the power unleashed by them was simply unimaginable. Only the woman standing alone in the ocean could experience this terrifying power for herself. Come at me. The heavenly light goddess slashed her scythe forward again. This time, a divine pattern even appeared on her forehead as she unleashed all of her power. The crimson crescent pierced through the ocean for over 500 kilometers before crashing into the countless golden swords, causing the ocean water to explode and vanish. There was no end to the golden swords. All of a sudden, the crimson crescent could no longer contain itself, and it transformed into a dazzling light that illuminated the entire world. Boom! The golden light tore through the white nectar sea. It tore through the dense, dark clouds in the sky and brought light to the entire world. An earth-shattering tsunami swept through the white nectar sea. All of the heavenly human tribe powerful beings were dumbstruck. The heavenly gods were also dumbstruck. They stared blankly at the scenes unfolding before their eyes with only one thought in their minds. Was the white nectar sea going to be blasted by light? Chapter 21:67. The battle at the bottom of the white nectar sea was extremely massive. All of the heavenly human tribe and heavenly gods on the divine tree could sense the surging energy at the bottom of the sea. How big was the white nectar sea? This was a sea that was many times larger than the continent of a small world. At this moment, the entire white nectar sea was in a frenzy. Tsunamis over 100,000 feet tall were surging. Golden light erupted from the bottom of the sea, and it was as if a sun had appeared over the white nectar sea. This is the power of light. What's going on? Could it be that the heavenly light goddess has already completed her transformation and is fighting our paramount heavenly gods? Gasp! How powerful must she be to dare to do this? Are we going to help them? Do you want to die, or do you not know what to do? A battle between them is not something we can intervene in. A heaven pioneer stage, great general scolded. All of the other heavenly human tribe, powerful beings, nodded in agreement. Their attacks were unable to break through the defenses of the paramount heavenly gods, and any clash between the paramount heavenly gods would be able to kill them. A battle of this caliber was not something they could intervene in. Activate the divine tree's defenses. Don't let the divine tree be toppled by the battle between the paramount heavenly gods. At this moment, the heavenly slaughter god had already issued a command to the heavenly human tribe, powerful beings. The heavenly gods, who loved to fight, were now making a defensive request. It was quite apparent that no one dared to intervene in this battle. Everyone chose to watch from the sidelines. All of the heavenly human tribe, powerful beings, channeled their power into a certain spell formation. The dark green light barrier soared into the sky and wrapped around the huge divine tree, protecting it tightly. At this moment, the huge wave was already rolling toward the divine tree. It was extremely fast, and the kinetic energy it carried seemed to be able to destroy the world. However, the massive waves were all kept at bay by the light barrier, and the divine tree remained completely unscathed. All of the nervous, heavenly human tribe, powerful beings, finally felt a sense of security at the sight of this light barrier. Whoosh! A crescent-shaped blade aura suddenly split the pure white ocean and coincidentally collided with the green light shield. Boom! Energy exploded forth. All of the heavenly human tribe, powerful beings, felt a violent tremor run through their bodies. The light barrier began to crack open at a rate discernible to the naked eye. A blue water humanoid was panting heavily as it pressed itself against the light barrier. It was none other than the heavenly sea god who had been struck by the light barrier. Heavenly sea god, are you all right? None of the heavenly human tribe powerful beings would have thought that the almost invincible heavenly sea god would appear before them in this form. This was simply unimaginable. The heavenly sea god didn't have time to deal with this army. He was just about to flee when a few more terrifying crimson crescent blades tore through the ocean toward him. Heavenly light goddess. He roared and slammed his palm toward the blood moon crescent blade. A giant ocean hand that was 100,000 feet tall blotted out the sky and the sun. It gathered the boundless power of the ocean and slammed down toward the blade. Boom, boom, boom. There were several explosions in the distance. He slapped away the energy on the surface of the blade projection, revealing the boundless power of light within it. This power of light could purify and pierce through all things. It was like a holy crescent moon that tore apart the gigantic palm before continuing toward the heavenly sea god. No. An expression of despair appeared on the heavenly sea god's face as his body was sliced into several pieces. The radiant crescent moon continued onward. Then, under the horrified gazes of the heavenly humans, the crescent moon sliced through the cracked green barrier. It continued on its way to the divine tree, slicing the divine tree into several pieces as if it were butter. Rumble, the massive divine tree, collapsed again. The heavenly human tribe, powerful beings, fled in panic. They were truly scared. The heavenly sea god and the divine tree had been sliced into several pieces right before their very eyes. How could they not be scared? All they could do was run as far away as they could. At this moment, an exquisitely beautiful woman in a black robe with red eyes and a blood moon scythe on her shoulder broke through the ocean and made her way toward the heavenly sea god. All of the heavenly human tribe powerful beings were dumbstruck upon seeing the heavenly light goddess appearance. This was the heavenly light goddess? Why was her style completely different from what they had imagined? Wasn't she supposed to be holy and mighty? Why was she wearing a dark style? However, they also knew that this really was the light goddess, as her extremely pure power of light could not be faked. Boom! A massive splash erupted. Another pale head made of clouds and mist appeared. There was a divine halo above its head that reflected heaven and earth like a mirror. Light, you can't do anything to us. If you continue to fight, you'll only be stalling for time. If you live on, you won't be able to escape. The heavenly heaven god's voice was extremely imposing and ethereal. Is that so? I don't think I'm just stalling for time. The divine goddess of light looked at the heavenly sea god who had just reformed his body. A faint smile appeared on her face as she looked at his trembling divine halo. See, how much longer can you last? The heavenly sea god wanted to beat someone up upon hearing this. Hee. I didn't think that you would do something as despicable as taking advantage of others. The heavenly sea god gritted his teeth and chuckled coldly. The light goddess expression remained unchanged. At least I'm better than some traitors. The heavenly sea god, light goddess, you've changed. You've become more adept at insulting others. You're no longer as transcendent and ethereal as you were in the past. Now that the light goddess possessed the life form of the Tai Chu continent, she would become more powerful, but she would also become more insignificant. It was unknown whether this was a good or a bad thing. In any case, this was a bad thing for the heavenly sea god. Women all held grudges. Even though she didn't say it, the light goddess was still chasing after him. So how could she not hold a grudge? At this moment, the light goddess was already charging toward him with her scythe. If things continued like this, the heavenly sea god really wouldn't be able to hold on any longer. Heavenly heaven, let's surround and kill her, the heavenly sea god yelled in a panicked voice. As soon as he finished speaking, the divine ring above his head erupted with light that swept out in all directions like an ocean, transforming the sky into rippling blue seawater. Heavenly god technique, mystic realm ocean. Rumble, the sound of water surging erupted. The ocean in the sky began to transform. The rippling seawater suddenly turned into a sinister purple color, and an even more bizarre smiling face appeared in the center of the ocean. It had no aura, but to put it more accurately, the ocean was its aura. The light goddess finally sensed danger at this moment. Right at this moment, the space around her instantly transformed into countless chaotic dimensions. From the outside, it was as if the light goddess had been twisted into many different forms, such as flat planes, lines, or even forms that transcended this world. Heavenly god technique, dimensional strike. The two heavenly gods finally unleashed their trump cards, and they crashed toward the heavenly light goddess. Chapter 2168. The ghostly purple ocean slowly crashed down upon her. There seemed to be countless sounds of laughter and cries reverberating through the air. The heavenly light goddess raised her head and smiled at the sight of the eerie, smiling face in the ocean. At this moment, the distorted dimension was already closing in on her. The heavenly light goddess slashed her scythe toward the dimension before her without any hesitation. A vast crimson crescent moon pierced through heaven and earth, but it exploded into countless particles of light upon colliding with the distorted dimension. This was a dimensional attack that could even distort and disintegrate light. The woman in black wanted to continue attacking, but her arms and legs were suddenly severed by an invisible dimensional attack. Her left hand became a ball that expanded infinitely. Her right hand became a piece of paper, and her long, slender legs became a line that detached from her body. Her crimson blood sprayed into the air before transforming into all types of shapes and forms, creating an extremely bizarre and terrifying sight to behold. This was the first time the heavenly light goddess had been injured since she obtained her new body. Not only did that excruciating pain enrage her, but it also made her heart feel extremely real. A peculiar light also appeared in her eyes, as if she had attained enlightenment. So this was what it felt like to be alive. At this moment, the eerie smiling face in the sky suddenly unleashed a wave-like ripple. The woman's movements were affected by the ripple, and she felt as if she had been submerged in a boundless ocean. She was unable to control her own body. The heavenly light goddess body was immobilized for an instant. At this moment, a purple dragon had already descended from the purple ocean before opening its gargantuan mouth and instantly engulfed her body before melting it into nothingness. Peace and quiet returned to heaven and earth. However, the heavenly earth god and the heavenly sea god didn't dare to let their guard down and continued to maintain their paramount heavenly god spell techniques. They knew that the heavenly light goddess couldn't be killed so easily. Sure enough, a speck of golden light appeared in the air before growing brighter and brighter, as if it were a light source imbued with boundless light and future. It instantly became even more dazzling than the sun, so much so that even the gigantic smiling face in the purple ocean couldn't help but narrow its eyes. "Continue attacking!" the heavenly sea god roared with rage. The heavenly heaven god's hair and beard stood on end as he unleashed his paramount heavenly power. Countless dimensional attacks distorted light and devoured it. However, the intensity of the light was a little excessive. It actually started to penetrate through the dimensions and tear through the barriers, as if it wanted to penetrate through all the worlds. At this moment, a gigantic pillar of water with a diameter of over 3 million feet fell from the sky. It was imbued with the boundless power of a paramount heavenly god, and it even caused the surrounding space to tremor and transform into a pure ocean. Purple became the dominant color, overshadowing the blossoming radiance. But no matter how they resisted, there was still a bit of golden light shining inside. Light is eternal. It is the one and only. It is the proof of the existence of all things in heaven and earth. Everything in the world needs me. So how can you obstruct my power? A cold and indifferent voice rang out. The golden light began to tear apart all dimensions and disintegrate all the ocean waves. Not good. Retreat. The heavenly heaven god's expression shifted drastically as he hurtled back in retreat. The heavenly sea god also began to fly backward. The golden light was like an explosion. In an instant, the power of light spread out in all directions at the speed of light. The light penetrated and melted everything. Everything, whether tangible or intangible, was purified into light particles by the light. The two heavenly gods were unable to evade in time, and their bodies were instantly shattered by the light. A gargantuan figure began to appear from within the light. She was extremely tall, at least 1,000,000 feet tall. Her head was above the heavens, and her feet were on the ground. She wore a golden holy robe, and she appeared to be holy and inviolable. However, her eyes were a crimson color, and it was as if they were imbued with extreme slaughter and destruction. The heavenly human tribe cultivators were struck by a sense of shock and awe at the sight of such a contradictory individual. It was as if they had seen a piece of exquisite art. Meanwhile, the two paramount heavenly gods' expressions shifted drastically as if they had seen a ghost. This is the heavenly light goddess full power form, myriad manifestations pagoda. We have to fight with all our might. The two paramount heavenly gods reacted as if they were facing a powerful enemy. If Enlin were here, he would definitely recognize this technique. Back when the heavenly light goddess had attacked the land of eternal light, she had used this technique against Chinchin, and she had even managed to wound Chinchin. Now, the heavenly light goddess was unleashing her ultimate technique again. This was a technique that was a little different from the one Enlin had seen in the past. However, her current form was that of a gargantuan beauty. She gave off the feeling that she was a pure life form. Her eyes were also crimson, and there was a crescent moon scythe several thousand kilometers in length hovering behind her. Her appearance was different, but the terrifying pressure she exuded was still the same. A sinister, smiling face emerged from within the purple ocean, and there was a hint of yearning in its eyes as it looked at the woman. It descended toward the woman along with the ocean, as if it were trying to engulf this perfect piece of art. The heavenly light goddess expression remained unchanged in the face of the descending ocean. In fact, there was even a faint smile on her face. Tens of thousands of pristine white arms suddenly appear behind her, each of which possessed an earth-shattering essence. Roar! A lightning dragon over 500 kilometers in length soared into the sky before exploding into the ocean. Countless bolts of lightning spread for tens of thousands of kilometers, causing the mystic ocean to tremble slightly before it continued to descend. Even the heavenly light goddess essence was unable to stop the descent of the ocean. However, this was only the power unleashed by a single essence. The heavenly light goddess had over 10,000 of them. Over 100 arms danced in the air. The soaring serpent transformed into the poison emperor and rose into the air to kill the ocean. The flame realm king unleashed holy flames to incinerate the heavens and boil the ocean. A sharp heavenly saber sliced the ocean in half. Countless crimson spikes that had been tainted by karma rained down like a torrential downpour, and the death-omened star unleashed billions of souls to tear into the gargantuan smiling face at the center of the ocean. 100 earth-shattering essence images exploded toward the ocean at the same time. The smiling face at the center of the ocean held with anguish as it laughed. However, it was still descending. It was hurting, but it could still hold on. Interesting. You've endured 1% of my heavenly light manifestation's power, but you still have the courage to face my power head-on. The heavenly light goddess raised her head with a slightly surprised expression on her face, but in the end she merely waved a hand, upon which the thousands of arms behind her also began to do the same. At this moment, the heavenly heaven god unleashed another dimensional attack upon the heavenly light goddess. But the heavenly light goddess used her countless arms to shatter the dimensional attack once again. Take this, myriad light manifestations. Over 1,000 essence images crashed toward the ocean in the sky at the same time. This was an extremely spectacular scene. It was as if the gods had descended upon the heavenly heaven god. Boundless energy exploded. An entire sky was filled with mystical phenomena. The gigantic face with the eerie smile was directly blasted into smithereens by the incomparably dazzling Dharma idol. The boundless purple ocean hanging high in the sky was also blasted into countless water droplets by the unimaginable Dharma idol, and then purified into light particles by the light. PFFF. The heavenly sea god's spell technique had been nullified, and he was severely wounded by the backlash. Chapter 2169. The all-encompassing pagoda was a manifestation created from light. The heavenly sea god's heavenly god technique had been broken by the light goddess with just 1,000 manifestations. Just how terrifying was this all-encompassing pagoda? The heavenly heaven god's dimensional attack was completely nullified by her 2,000 arms. This meant that if she unleashed her full combat prowess, she would be able to handle the combined attacks of 2 paramount heavenly gods with ease. This was an indication of just how terrifying her true combat prowess was. Just how terrifying would her combat prowess be after she completed her transformation? The heavenly sea god didn't dare to think about it, and neither did the heavenly heaven god. They only had one thought in their minds, and that was to kill the heavenly light goddess. However, how were they supposed to defeat such a powerful light goddess? At this moment, the heavenly sea god was already greeted by the sight of over 1,000 Dharma idols covering heaven and earth. It was as if over 1,000 types of apocalyptic divine might were crashing down upon him, and he had nowhere to run. Boundless ocean. The heavenly sea god let loose an enraged roar as his blue sea divine halo activated to its maximum extent, and cracks began to appear on it. At the same time, its paramount laws carried out an absolute command. An entire white nectar sea rose into the air and quickly rose into the air. The entire sea had transformed into a shield in order to keep the boundless manifestation attacks at bay. From afar, countless living beings could see that the entire boundless sea had risen up into the air and clashed with countless terrifying powers, and the resulting explosion lit up the entire continent. The heavenly human tribe united army fled in horror, and some of the soldiers who didn't get out of the white nectar sea in time were swept up by the boundless sea and crashed into the manifestation at the center of the sea. The tens of millions of soldiers in Yutong City had naturally witnessed this earth-shattering scene. Even though this place was very far from the white nectar sea, how could they ignore the sight of the 10,000 manifestation pagoda that was 1,000,000 feet tall and the entire white nectar sea? Even a mortal could clearly see the devastation taking place in the distance. The roar of the ocean and the boundless piercing light could be clearly seen by powerful beings with a certain cultivation base, even those in the southern Heavenly Wing Nation or the Buddhist Kingdom of the West, who were situated nearby. This battle was far too massive, and it was destined to shock the entire Tai Chu continent. Yutong City had already entered a state of complete combat readiness. All the soldiers looked at the shock waves of the collision in the distance and felt their hearts tremble inexplicably. The entire White Nectar Sea had been erected to defend against an attack, not just an entire sea, but the entire inner sea at the center of the Tai Chu continent. What kind of power did that require? Even Tao integration stage, super mighty figures were unable to fathom what kind of power that was, and they could only stare in awe and wonder from afar. Is this the power of a paramount heavenly god? Every time I see it, I truly feel how insignificant I am. No wonder sect leader and Lin gave the order not to initiate a battle no matter what happens today. So it turns out that a battle between 2 paramount sky gods has erupted today. Why are the light and the ocean fighting? Also, where's our god in? He must have gone to do something big. But what if the paramount heavenly god attacks our Yutong city while he's away? Some people felt like Lin wasn't here, so they didn't feel safe. However, their unease gradually subsided when they saw the figure in the jade dress standing atop the city wall. They had a trump card as well. Divine Phoenix Maiden Su Xiaolan was also here. So even if the paramount heavenly gods were to attack, they should be able to hold them off for a while, right? At this moment, Su Xiaolan stood before her with her dragon sparrow sword in her hands, and her pure golden eyes stared at the battle in the distance, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. Her original plan was that if Lin was being attacked by the 3 paramount heavenly gods, she would immediately step into the fray. However, she never would have thought that the heavenly light goddess would be the one to stir things up and completely mess up the situation. It could be said that the heavenly light goddess had become a temporary ally of hers. It had to be said that anything could happen in this world. Some people with insufficient cultivation bases could only see the ocean and the light clashing. However, she knew that this was actually the battlefield where the 3 paramount heavenly gods were battling. It was just that the heavenly heaven god's power was very difficult to detect. The heavenly light goddess was more powerful than most people could imagine. My current power is about the same as the severely wounded heavenly sea god. I'm still too weak. Su Xiaolan gripped her sword hilt tightly as she looked at the battle between the 3 paramount heavenly gods, and a peculiar battle intent welled up in her heart. She wanted to battle. Through battle, she wanted to test her Tao. She had rejected the opportunity to sever her past and transcend, as well as the opportunity to transcend beyond the 3 realms. However, she refused to believe that transcending was the only way to become more powerful. There were other ways for her to become more powerful. She had to find an opportunity through this battle. Even though she was spectating this battle from afar, she could still feel a lot of emotions on the white nectar sea. The light goddess unleashed over 1,000 Tao projections, but she was still unable to break through the white nectar sea's defenses. The heavenly sea god had the entire Tai Chu continent's core ocean power firmly in his hands. This power could even allow the great Tao of heaven and earth to silently support his will. The light goddess was forced back by the pure white ocean, and she was about to be engulfed by the boundless white nectar sea. Even though she was over 1,000,000 feet tall, she was still extremely tiny and insignificant in the face of this ocean. 5,000 Tao projections. The goddess of light suddenly let out a clear shout. Her pristine, long arms each wielded an earth-shattering Tao projection, which she tossed toward the ocean. There were a total of 5,000 Tao projections. Once there was a certain number of Tao projections, a fundamental change would occur. Indescribable Tao projections soared into the heavens and shook the heavens. An indescribably vast amount of top-level energy and Tao realm erupted forth at this moment, shattering the heavens and puncturing the ocean. Boom, boom, boom. The heavenly sea god was struck by a sense of insignificance in the face of this power. He had already unleashed his full power, and this was clearly his home ground. Rumble, the ocean exploded into countless massive balls of water. The light goddess pierced through the ocean and appeared before the heavenly sea god. A crimson moon scythe was slashed toward the heavenly sea god's body, leaving him with nowhere to run. Rip. The heavenly sea god's body was sliced in half. Even his origin authority of the sea was sliced in half. Chapter 2170. The heavenly sea god sensed death. After battling for so long, this was the first time he had sensed death. Not only had his body been sliced in half, but even his essential heavenly god powers had been severed. If the paramount heavenly god powers weren't powerful enough, he would have already ascended into the sky and returned to the heavenly Tao, losing all self-awareness forever. Heavenly Sea, this is the consequence of your betrayal. The divine light goddess looked down at her severed body. The pure power of light was still disintegrating the severed body, and the divine light goddess was even trying to purify the heavenly sea god power into particles of light. This was not wishful thinking. She really could do it, and she was already halfway there. The heavenly heaven god attacked the heavenly light goddess from the side in an attempt to buy time for the heavenly sea god. Then, the heavenly light goddess unleashed 3,000 light manifestations toward the heavenly heaven god, severely wounding the heavenly heaven god. No, she's far too powerful. This heavenly light goddess is far too powerful. The divine light goddess turned her dangerous gaze toward the heavenly sea god again. The heavenly sea god wanted to recover his body, but his severed body was being corroded by the power of light, so there was no way he could recover in a short time. If things continued like this, he was going to die. Die. The divine light goddess spoke in an indifferent voice, as if she was pronouncing the heavenly sea god's fate. She raised her crimson moon scythe high above her head. She didn't pretend this time, and an unimaginable holy light erupted from the scythe in her hand. It was like a holy and mighty heavenly judgment scythe, completely devoid of all the violence and slaughter from before. This was clearly a transcendence. The crimson moon scythe fell. The heavenly sea god heaved a faint sigh as he looked at the boundless light engulfing him. So be it. Who would have thought that things would develop to this point? If I die, I'll have nothing left. If I'm still alive, no matter how weak I am, I'll still have a chance to live. The light from the crimson moon scythe completely engulfed the heavenly sea god's body. The holy light purified his body, which was imbued with the paramount power of the ocean, into countless particles of light. Even though his opponent was a paramount heavenly god, he was still unable to resist this absolute purification. The power of light was just that mighty and domineering. However, there was a single drop of liquid within the heavenly sea god's body that was glowing with a peculiar divine light that resisted the invasion of light. It looked very small, but it was extremely sturdy, so sturdy that even the power of light of the goddess of light could not penetrate it. It was also pure and transparent. It was a small liquid, but it reflected the entire world. Not only that, but the vastness of its interior could not be understood even if it was magnified countless times. The liquid began to split. 1 drop became 2 drops. 2 drops became 4 drops. 4 drops became 16 drops. 16 drops became 256 drops. The liquid grew very quickly. The heavenly light goddess discovered this anomaly, and she immediately used her light Dharma idol to bombard her opponent's liquid. However, the liquid was unable to be purified or annihilated at all, and it continued to increase at a terrifying rate. In the end, this rate of increase would reach an astronomical figure. Soon, the liquid converged into a river, and the river began to converge into an ocean. In the end, a brand new ocean appeared before the heavenly light goddess. The ocean was extremely pure. It was an ocean composed of the purest liquid, an unknown liquid that was even purer than water. It was so pure that one would feel as if their entire life had been cleansed with a single glance. It was clean, but it wasn't an ocean that was devoid of nutrients and couldn't sustain life. On the contrary, it contained all types of pure and orthodox substances and energy that could allow all life to thrive here. It looked like a complete ocean that was a mixture of all sorts of things, yet it was so pure and beautiful that it made one want to sink into it. A living being that was over 1,000,000 feet tall and wielding a golden trident slowly emerged from the center of the ocean. It was none other than the heavenly sea god, who had grown countless times larger. His body was the deepest blue color, as if it could engulf everything. However, it also appeared extremely clear and clean. Most importantly, there were all types of peculiar patterns of the great Tao all over his body. Each and every one of them was a manifestation of the great Tao, and it was as if many things could be born from them. Heavenly light, you forced my hand. The heavenly sea god's voice was deep and vast. Heavenly sea god, I've finally forced your Tao idol out. The heavenly light goddess took a deep breath, and light surged forth from within her body as if she was trying to completely dispel the boundless sense of oppression that enveloped her body. "You've successfully exhausted my greatest trump card. Are you very happy?" The heavenly sea god spoke expressionlessly. As he spoke, the ocean beneath his feet was still expanding in a frenzy, and there was no end in sight. This was clearly a colorless ocean of liquid, but this liquid of unknown composition struck the heavenly light goddess with an indescribable sense of oppression. This was the sense of oppression produced by the heavenly gods when their powers were released to the limit. This power was far too powerful, and it was powerful enough to affect other heavenly gods. If some of the weaker heavenly gods were here, they would probably immediately kneel down and revere the heavenly sea god as the only paramount being. "I am indeed very happy that I've exhausted your trump card." The heavenly light goddess cocked her head to the side with a faint smile, and her body quickly shrank from over 1,000,000 feet tall to the size of a normal human. She had already unleashed her myriad manifestations pagoda, and it would be difficult for her to use it again in a short time. However, this was already enough. She had achieved her goal. "Brother C, you." The heavenly heaven god's emotions were extremely turbulent. A sense of sorrow and rage welled up in his heart as he glowered at the black-robed woman standing nearby. Heavenly light slash. The heavenly light goddess slashed her scythe through the air, and a golden slash imbued with the paramount divine might of light surged toward the heavenly sea god. The heavenly sea god stood silently in the center of the ocean. The slash of light pierced through the ocean, but the power of light became smaller and smaller as it traveled, until it finally disappeared. Upon closer inspection, the vortex above the ocean had absorbed the power of light that could purify all things. That's it. The heavenly sea god didn't even attack. Instead, he merely stared at the heavenly light goddess in silence. However, what he saw was the heavenly light goddess back. The heavenly light goddess was about to escape. A streak of golden light sped into the distance at an incredible speed. If this were the heavenly sea god of the past, he would probably be completely powerless in the face of such an insane speed and could only look on helplessly as his opponent escaped. However, he only had to use a single thought now. A massive ocean vortex appeared in front of the heavenly light goddess like a wall of despair, threatening to engulf the streak of golden light. The streak of golden light shuddered violently, and it was stopped in its tracks. Even the heavenly light goddess didn't dare to enter this ocean vortex. Chapter 2171. Reality had proven that once a heavenly god's power reached a certain level, it would strike fear into the hearts of all other heavenly gods. At this moment, the heavenly sea god's paramount heavenly god's power was being suppressed to the maximum. The power he unleashed was far more powerful than the heavenly light goddess had imagined. However, the heavenly light goddess didn't give up just like that. She unleashed her light escape technique again in an attempt to circle around the whirlpool before her. The heavenly sea god willed another whirlpool to appear in front of the heavenly light goddess. The heavenly light goddess quickly turned and tried to circle around it, but the whirlpool only grew larger and larger. In the end, it surrounded her from all directions. "Withdraw!" The heavenly sea god gripped the air toward the heavenly light goddess. The whirlpool was in the shape of a spherical water ball, and it suddenly contracted toward the heavenly light goddess, creating an unparalleled water pressure that could pulverize everything within it. Heavenly god technique, Dawn. The heavenly light goddess forcefully activated her heavenly god power and unleashed an extremely dazzling light. This light was the light of dawn. It could pierce through all darkness and nothingness, and it could break through all shackles and perilous situations. Not only was it a powerful power of light, but it was also an extremely terrifying power of consciousness and intent realm. Rip! The spherical whirlpool was torn apart by the light. A streak of light flew out from the crack and into the sky. The heavenly sea god's expression shifted drastically, and he immediately pointed his golden trident at the heavenly light goddess. "Myriad seas, heavenly prison." One sea after another began to appear around the heavenly light goddess. Some were seas of red flames, some were seas of lightning, and some were spiritual seas that contained all sorts of strange energies. Every single one of these seas was revolving like a strange galaxy, releasing an endless aura. Every ocean here contained the purest power of the ocean. Its greatest characteristic was that it was vast and deep. It was clearly an extremely powerful individual, but it was also connected to each other, forming a whole that could completely envelop and seal its target. All the heavenly light goddess could see was an ocean, and there was no way she could avoid it. She could only choose to unleash her heavenly god power again and use her light power to break through. She finally understood the heavenly sea god's true plan. Her opponent was trying to exhaust the heavenly light god's remaining energy through this kind of endless and forceful exhaustion. Then, she would become a fish waiting to be slaughtered. In terms of how much power the heavenly sea god possessed, the light goddess was no match for the heavenly sea god. After all, the heavenly sea god was in a state where he could avoid being suppressed by the heavenly Tao to the greatest extent. At this moment, the heavenly space god had already closed in on the light goddess. It opened its mouth, and the black clouds and mist in the sky transformed into a series of chains that shot toward the light goddess. This was no ordinary cloud and mist. Instead, it was a spatial chain that was formed from the extreme compression of all the spatial energy in the world. Not only could it seal the surrounding space, but the strength and hardness of the spatial chain itself was also more than 1,000 times that of ordinary space. Even a god of creation would find it difficult to break free after being bound. The goddess of light could not avoid it, so she made a very decisive decision. Ultimate deity art, light of two realms. The goddess of light's heart suddenly began to beat violently, and the divine halo above her head began to tremble nonstop. At the same time, a strange purple-gold light enveloped her body, causing her body to gradually transform into a purple-gold beam of light. This was the light with the most powerful, penetrative power. This was the most powerful escape technique that the heavenly light goddess could unleash. The light of two realms. If she knew the coordinates of the two worlds, she would even be able to use this beam of light to instantly traverse through the two worlds. It's just an ocean. In my eyes, it's nothing more than a blink of an eye. Countless spatial chains formed a massive net that shot toward the heavenly light goddess. However, after the heavenly light goddess transformed into a purple-gold beam of light, her speed once again skyrocketed to an unimaginable level. She could even use the coordinates within the chaos to evade at super light speed. Even the heavenly heaven god, who controlled the entire void, found it difficult to keep up with her speed using spatial chains. How was she supposed to keep up with this? The purple-gold beam of light quickly found an opening in the countless spatial chains and escaped from them at an extreme angle and speed. The heavenly sea god was the heavenly sea god's heavenly sea god, so his perception and control over the great Tao of heaven and earth had already reached the extreme limit. Thus, he was still able to capture the heavenly light goddess movements. The heavenly sea god immediately controlled the galaxy-like ocean to intercept the heavenly light goddess. There were so many oceans, and they were enough to completely seal off all of the heavenly light goddess escape routes. The heavenly light goddess was already being intercepted by the soul extinction sea. Which direction was she going to escape to next? The heavenly sea god was pondering. However, what he didn't expect was that the heavenly light goddess didn't evade. Instead, she charged directly toward the soul extinction sea. The purple-gold beam of light was like a sharp sword that pierced viciously into the ocean. How is this possible? The heavenly sea god was astonished. This was the ocean that he had summoned when he was in his true Tao form, yet the heavenly light goddess charged into it just like that. Did she have a death wish? However, in the next instant, the heavenly sea god felt the penetrative power of that purple-gold beam of light. This was no ordinary penetrative power. Instead, it truly possessed the power to pierce through two worlds. The soul extinction sea even began to distort and rot from the piercing of that beam of light. Not good. If things continued like this, the heavenly light goddess was going to break through his siege. "Ah, I'll kill you!" The heavenly sea god roared with indignation. The heavenly light goddess had already forced him to use all of his trump cards. The heavenly sea god was utterly humiliated. If he didn't even have the ability to force the heavenly light goddess to stay, wouldn't that mean that his true Tao form would be wasted here? No, he definitely couldn't allow that to happen. The heavenly sea god controlled the ocean to form countless barriers in front of the heavenly light goddess. "You have the ability to pierce through one of my oceans, but can you pierce through all of my oceans?" His voice had only just fallen when an explosion erupted from the soul extinction sea. The purple-gold beam of light had already mercilessly pierced through the boundless ocean. The heavenly heaven god unleashed a spell technique to intercept the heavenly light goddess again. The heavenly light goddess evaded once again. She didn't even have a chance to touch a speck of her light. The heavenly heaven god had no choice but to unleash a full-screen control to seal off all of the space around her. However, full-screen control meant that his power wasn't concentrated. The heavenly light goddess pierced through the barrier and tore through the heavenly heaven god's control. Then she continued to flee and plunged into the heavenly sea god's ocean vortex. The heavenly sea god was under immense pressure. He was infuriated by the heavenly heaven god's incompetent performance. More importantly, he felt that the heavenly light goddess had already exceeded his control. Regardless of whether it was her speed or penetrative abilities, they were both too terrifying. Just as he was thinking this, another ocean was pierced through by the heavenly light goddess. The heavenly sea god continued to control the terrifyingly powerful ocean with great difficulty and obstructed the heavenly light goddess escape route. Finally, the heavenly light goddess was trapped in a perilous situation. However, the heavenly light goddess didn't give up. Instead, she continued to charge through the barrier. The heavenly sea god's face turned green upon seeing this. He wasn't as relaxed as he appeared. Although he could control a large amount of ocean, he was afraid that the heavenly light goddess would be able to escape before her energy was completely depleted if things continued like this. Chapter 2172. Just as he was pondering this, the heavenly light goddess pierced through another ocean. The purple golden beam of light flew at a speed that the heavenly heaven god was unable to keep up with. After passing through one of the oceans, it crashed into the second ocean that the heavenly sea god had prepared for her. The heavenly sea god felt as if his own power had been shaken by this collision, and his legs had become a little weak. However, he still continued to chase after the heavenly light goddess. He had to do everything possible to stop the heavenly light goddess. No, he couldn't continue like this. Right at this moment, the purple golden beam of light pierced through the ocean again. The heavenly sea god had no idea how to stop it, and it seemed to be provoking him. The heavenly sea god gritted his teeth in rage. This heavenly light goddess was a freak. Why was she able to unleash such terrifying speed without using her true Tao manifestation? Why? If things continued like this, she might really be able to escape from the ocean. No, I can't waste my true Tao manifestation here. Heavenly heaven. The heavenly sea god's chest rose and fell with rage at the sight of the bewildered heavenly heaven god. "You're so useless." The heavenly heaven god faltered initially before a resigned expression appeared on its face. "What can I do? She's overexerting the power of the heavenly gods, and I can't keep up with her at all. Furthermore, the light of two realms is like paper to me. Tell me, what else can I do?" The heavenly heaven god couldn't think of anything. This heavenly light goddess was like a bug in the game. Even without using her true Tao manifestation, her combat prowess was already far superior to that of the other paramount heavenly gods. No wonder the heavenly light goddess dared to challenge the two of them at once. I have a very good way to make you useful, the heavenly sea god suddenly said. What is it? The heavenly heaven god asked. You can help me if you use your true Tao manifestation now, right? The heavenly sea god replied. The heavenly heaven god. The true Tao manifestation was the most powerful trump card of the paramount heavenly gods. It was a top-notch buff technique that could only be used once in a paramount heavenly god's life. However, the heavenly sea god was asking him to use it so casually? Had it gone insane? Or was the heavenly sea god going insane? Trust me, the two of us will definitely be able to kill the heavenly light goddess, the heavenly sea god said in an excited voice. The heavenly heaven god hesitated momentarily before gritting its teeth and saying, But I have my own plans. I can't waste my true form here. The heavenly sea god was enraged upon hearing this. What do you mean waste? Forcing out the heavenly light god's Tao origin form was what it meant to make the best use of it. If you can't bear to use your true Tao form, then if the heavenly light goddess manages to escape, then my true Tao form will be wasted. This is the best opportunity to force the heavenly light goddess to use her trump card. Heavenly heaven god, please use your Tao form immediately, the heavenly sea god yelled. The heavenly heaven god felt like this was an absurd world. The true manifestation of Tao was clearly the paramount heavenly god's final trump card. It was a life-saving trump card, and he was still very safe. But his allies were advising him to use this trump card. More importantly, he couldn't find any reason to refute. The heavenly sea god's words seemed to make some sense. The heavenly light goddess combat prowess was simply too terrifying. If she were to unleash her true Tao form after completing her transformation, just how powerful would she be? Seizing this opportunity to use the heavenly sea god's Tao form to force out the heavenly sea god's trump card was indeed a very good idea. However, he clearly had his own plans. Furthermore, the true manifestation of Tao could only be combined with the three-phase true heavenly reincarnation formation to unleash an invincible, earth-shattering effect. Now that the heavenly sea god's true manifestation of Tao was missing, the formation's effect would be significantly weaker. In other words, if he forced out the heavenly sea god's trump card, then his own trump card would also be weakened. The heavenly heaven god was caught in a dilemma. This was an extremely difficult decision to make. At this moment, the purple golden light of two realms pierced through the heavenly sea god's ocean barrier again before continuing to flee into the distance. The heavenly sea god tried his best to control the surrounding ocean barrier to intercept it. However, the distance between them was still being widened. Hurry up! I can't hold on any longer, the heavenly sea god yelled. The heavenly heaven god could see that the streak of light was extremely fast, and it was not something that could be stopped by normal beings. He was clearly the ruler of the entire sky, but he was unable to keep up with his opponent's speed. It was too fast, too powerful, too powerful. However, the heavenly sea god was indeed very powerful. Wasn't he able to keep up with the light goddess? Furthermore, he was able to keep up with the light goddess. Most importantly, there was no way the light goddess could match up to the heavenly sea god in terms of unleashing the power of the paramount heavenly gods. It was still possible that the light goddess would be completely exhausted in the next second, thereby allowing the heavenly sea god to secure the final victory. Perhaps he could secure the final victory without using his true Tao form? That's right, this was entirely possible. The heavenly heaven god felt like he had found the crux of the matter. Right at this moment, an unimaginable pain suddenly erupted in his head. A gargantuan golden trident suddenly punctured his head. An extremely terrifying and pure power of the ocean exploded violently, as if a boundless tsunami were destroying everything in its path, striking the heavenly sea god with an extreme sense of horror. Ah! The heavenly heaven god let loose a blood-curdling cry. A cold, boundless voice sounded from behind him. F***CK. Why are you hesitating? Let me make the decision for you. A gigantic god constructed from a peculiar, liquid, held a golden trident in his hand as he glowered at the Heavenly Heaven God with a resentful expression. "Heavenly Sea God, you dare!" The Heavenly Heaven God was dumbstruck, and his mind was completely blank. Never would he have thought that the Heavenly Sea God would stab his head with this weapon that he had never used. What kind of ally was this? His scalp had gone numb. "Don't blame me. I'm making the decision for you," the Heavenly Sea God said with a pained expression. "You're about to die. If you don't release your true Tao form, you won't be able to survive. Do you know what to do now? For the sake of our great cause, transform." The Heavenly Sea God spoke with a meaningful expression. Boom! The ocean was parted. The purplish golden beam of light broke through another layer of ocean. She was just about to flee into the distance when she discovered the Heavenly Sea God stabbing his golden trident into the Heavenly Heaven God's head, and her entire body shuddered involuntarily. She wasn't intimidated by the Heavenly Sea God's true Tao form, but she was completely petrified by this. The Heavenly Sea God wasn't chasing after her, but he was killing an ally instead? What the F***CK was going on? Chapter 2173. This was the first time that the Heavenly Light Goddess felt like she was in a daze. For a split second, she even wondered if the Heavenly Sea God was a teammate hiding in the enemy camp, waiting to deal a lethal blow to the enemy at the most critical moment. But she quickly rejected this idea. The Heavenly Heaven God's blood-curdling cries were still reverberating through the air, but all of a sudden it stopped. This was because its head had completely exploded into a cloud of mist and dissipated in the air. A sense of dread suddenly welled up in the Heavenly Light Goddess heart. The sky within a radius of 1,000,000 miles had changed. Following that, an incomparably huge figure began to appear in the sky. Its entire body was pure white, and it had the appearance of a human. Its body floated flat in the sky, its arms and legs stretched out as if it was lying on the ground. Just its head alone was hundreds of thousands of miles in size, enough to cover the entire sky. The entire world seemed to be under the control of such a being. The space was so viscous that it caused all living things to come to a standstill, and the atmosphere was so oppressive that all living beings found it hard to breathe. The heavenly human tribe cultivators who had just escaped from the White Nectar Sea were in a dire situation. They had thought that they would be safe after leaving the White Nectar Sea. However, before they could even heave a sigh of relief, they discovered a gargantuan, humanoid figure sprawled over their heads. The Heavenly Heaven God was clearly just unleashing its aura, but it was able to make their bodies tremble uncontrollably. This was the involuntary trembling and submission of low-level life forms in the face of a mighty being. "Ocean, look at what you did!" A furious voice exploded out in the sky, causing a huge gale to kick up for millions of kilometers. The Heavenly Heaven God's wrath was enough to make the entire realm tremble. A gratified smile appeared on the Heavenly Sea God's face when he saw the Heavenly Heaven God's expression. Then, a sorrowful and solemn expression appeared on his face. "I'm doing this for the sake of victory. I'm doing this to dispel the misgivings in your heart. If you have any grievances, you can vent them on me. Now, let's deal with the Heavenly Light God together, okay? Don't waste this origin of Tao." The Heavenly Heaven God's gargantuan head was filled with rage, but it knew the severity of the situation. Thus, it turned its gaze toward the purple-golden light of 2 realms down below, and just a single glance was enough to fortify the space within a radius of over 5,000 kilometers by 10,000 times. Even a god of creation would be completely immobilized in that place. This is the true form of the Heavenly Heaven God. The Heavenly Light Goddess was imprisoned, and she looked up at the sky. She felt as if her horizons had been broadened. It was really big. His body occupied the entire sky. Not only was its body huge, but the aura it gave off was also extremely terrifying. Just looking at it made her feel as if she had nowhere to hide. She wasn't the only one who was shocked. Even the Yu Tong Divine City's heaven-crushing army was stunned. In this world, there was actually someone who could do this. Its gargantuan body had traveled countless kilometers from the White Nectar Sea to Yu Tong, Divine City. What if the Yu Tong Divine City were to be annihilated with a single kick? All of the returned to Void Stage mighty figures who felt like they were already among the most powerful beings in the world were shocked speechless at the sight of the humanoid figure in the sky. The more they experienced, the more they realized how insignificant they were. In the face of a battle of this level, they were probably not even cannon fodder, right? Su Xiaolan's expression changed again and again. The heavenly heaven gods, Tao, true manifestation. Are you kidding me? 2 paramount heavenly gods have already unleashed their Tao, true manifestations in just one battle. If things continue like this, will the heavenly light goddess be forced to unleash her Tao, true manifestation as well? If it weren't for the fact that this is a battle between 2 paramount heavenly gods, I would have thought that this was the final battle. Her body trembled lightly, and the vermilion bird and true dragon bloodlines within her body began to churn for some reason, as if they were yearning for battle and a breakthrough. Battling normal heavenly gods wouldn't be able to provide her with much enlightenment, but battling a paramount heavenly god would definitely be able to significantly enhance her Tao. However, she still forcibly repressed this urge. In her current state, facing a paramount heavenly god in his true Tao form was no different from courting death. She had to wait for the outcome of the battle to become clear. The final battle doesn't have to wait for everyone to attack. If there's an opportunity, perhaps tonight can be the final battle. Su Xiaolan knew what this night represented. This was an extremely crucial opportunity for the heaven-crushing army. Sigh. If only Enlin was here, the outside world is already in a state of chaos. Enlin, how are things going on your side? She turned to look at the White Nectar Sea, which had been blasted beyond recognition, and murmured. Within the living world, the flower goddess unleashed her most powerful spell technique, the Heaven Hell Flower, and bit down on Enlin. Less than 10 seconds later, the Hell Flower, which was imbued with the power of the entire world, was pulverized by a series of sword projections. Enlin charged out. A black light flashed, and he appeared before the flower goddess before gently tapping a finger on her forehead. Finger of the heavenly Tao. The darkness, divine Tao, and heaven-crushing techniques were perfectly combined. Boundless golden light erupted from his fingertip, and at the same time, a golden shockwave that was capable of engulfing and annihilating everything transformed into a golden shockwave that punctured the flower goddess body. Wonder God had just pulled out the poison arrow and was about to abandon Enlin to fight the life goddess when his body shuddered involuntarily upon seeing this brutal scene. Enlin immediately unleashed a fist of the heavenly Tao toward Wonder God without any hesitation. Wonder God's body exploded on the spot. Why didn't Enlin try to stall Wonder God and the flower goddess? That was because he could sense that the members of the God of Destruction team were facing an extremely terrifying crisis. The life goddess was no longer weak. The members of the God of Destruction team were no match for her. They would all be wiped out, and Lin couldn't afford to keep this up. All those who stand in my way shall die. He roared with rage as he unleashed his divine simulation technique to locate the life goddess. He then flew into the distance without any hesitation. At this moment, the flower goddess used the power of heaven and earth to revive herself. Ha ha ha, I'm in your way. Come and kill me. I'm not afraid of death. The flower goddess unleashed a large number of flower vines toward the flying Enlin. She was indeed not afraid of death. Enlin could kill her, but she could revive an unlimited number of times. As expected, Enlin's speed was not as fast as the flower goddess. After all, this was her world, her home field. Even though this world couldn't directly kill Enlin, she still had 100 ways to deal with Enlin. Enlin used his sword to slice through the flower vines. At this moment, the flower goddess had already charged in front of him with a mocking smile. Come and kill me. Enlin took a deep breath as a dark light flashed through his eyes. All right, I'll fulfill your wish. Chapter 2174. The complete divine Tao of darkness flowed out from Enlin's heart and the chaotic black vortex behind him. It was the purest darkness, a darkness that could turn everything into eternal darkness. When the flower goddess saw the darkness in front of her, she immediately felt a sense of fear. It was an instinctive fear and had nothing to do with subjective fear. She would never feel fear because she firmly believed that as long as she was in a living world, she was the symbol of invincibility. Even if Enlin killed her 10,000 times, she would still be able to jump out to harass and mock Enlin. Enlin raised the evil-slaying sword in his hand. A blinding golden light pierced through the sky. It contained a supreme, heaven-crushing true intent. Do you know, I've discovered a phenomenon. That is, the heaven-crushing spell techniques are especially useful in a living world. How useful are they? They're so useful that every time I use a heaven-crushing spell technique, I feel like I can completely destroy the world in front of me. And Lin looked at the flower goddess, whose eyes gradually became filled with fear. A layer of extremely pure darkness appeared on the evil-slaying sword's golden light. Its power continued to increase by several levels, causing the flower goddess' heart to jump for no reason. Die! Wonder God suddenly appeared behind Enlin. His feet were like two sharp heavenly blades, slashing toward Enlin's neck. The space around him was split in half, and a small part of Enlin's protective darkness was torn apart. Enlin's blade turned, and a golden sword projection surged. It was as if something had swept through the void, and a bloody line appeared from Wonder God's head to his feet. Then his body split into two halves in the process of flying, splitting into two halves without any hindrance or pause. This was only a wisp of sword intent from the golden sword projection. What are you doing? The flower goddess expression changed drastically. What am I doing? I'm fulfilling your wish to die. And Lin gripped the hilt of his sword tightly and stared coldly at the flower goddess, as if he was looking at a dead person. Of course, the death I'm talking about might not be the same as what you're thinking. The darkness silenced all living things, and the golden light made the sky tremble. Darkness, sword of the heavenly Tao. And Lin suddenly slashed with his sword. Boom! The golden sword chi exploded in this world, violently tearing apart everything. Forests, oceans, mountains, plains, space, the heavens, and even the laws of heaven and earth were rapidly torn apart by this sword. At this moment, everything was heading towards destruction. No. Flower God's eyes widened as she watched the terrifying sword energy destroy everything. Her body couldn't stop trembling. She knew that this slash wasn't aimed at her, but at the entire world. Countless living beings met their end under this sword. Countless substances were reduced to nothingness by this sword. The laws began to shatter. In the heaven-crushing sect, there was a rule. That was, if one could successfully crush the heavens in the simulated small world, they could become a candidate for heavenly disciple. Therefore, every son of heaven candidate had limitless potential. They were all big shots who had once broken through the heavens. However, they had only destroyed a small world. To destroy a large world, the difficulty level was completely different. The living world created by the goddess of life could be said to be second only to the Tai Chu continent. To destroy such a large world, even a true heavenly disciple would find it hard to do so without sufficient preparation. And now, Enlin was going to make the impossible possible. In order to fulfill the flower god's wish of killing her, Enlin was going all out. He decided to do something that others wouldn't even dare to think of. Crush the heavens. That's right, he was going to use absolute power to destroy the heavenly Tao of this world. The flower god had the power to create a world and could revive infinitely. Then, Enlin was going to use what she relied on. If he destroyed this world, then wouldn't the flower god's support be gone? Wouldn't that mean that she couldn't revive? For example, if you wanted to make a company's employee lose his job, but that employee's backer was the company's chairman, he couldn't be killed no matter what. What could you do? It was very simple. Make the company bankrupt. This was the simplest and clearest method. It was suitable for peerless, powerful people. No. For the first time, the flower god was struck by boundless fear, and her entire body trembled. She frantically tried to use her power of creation to stop all of this, to stop this destructive power. However, once this power exceeded a certain limit, even she would be powerless. The darkness sword of the heavenly Tao before her was the most powerful technique that Enlin had unleashed after perfectly fusing his darkness and heaven-crushing techniques. The power that it unleashed in that instant was enough to send chills down the spines of even the paramount heavenly gods, let alone the flower god. It was quite clear that this sword had completely broken free from the flower god's control. The immortal realm that was filled with life and miracles had been transformed into an inky darkness. The darkness was engulfing everything in this world, regardless of whether it was tangible matter or intangible space and energy. The golden light tore through the sky like a supreme golden dragon skimming over the top of the world, slashing apart the laws hidden in the world and then destroying them. The heavens mourned, and all things trembled in fear. A series of thin black lines appeared on the surface of the evil-slaying sword before spreading toward heaven and earth. These thin lines didn't look like much at first glance. However, if a powerful being were to look at them, they would definitely be astonished. This was because the black lines within the sword were actually a series of Tao that led directly to the essence of everything. They represented the ultimate pursuit of everything. How many of these black lines were there? There were countless of them. They formed special veined patterns that spread outward, piercing into the void of this world like black swords. Immediately afterward, the world began to tremor violently. This tremor was several times more violent than when Enlin unleashed his darkness, sword of the heavenly Tao. The flower god hadn't been struck by Enlin's attack, but she was struck by an indescribable backlash. She threw up blood relentlessly, and the flowers and vines on her body began to quickly wither. The recently resurrected Qi Xin still had an arm that hadn't recovered, and it completely stopped regenerating. They were all terrified as their minds went blank at the sight of everything being destroyed. He's not destroying everything on the surface of this world. He's even destroying the great Tao of heaven and earth of this world. The essence of the heavenly Tao has been severely wounded. The two gods were both astonished. Everything that was happening before their eyes was truly earth-shattering, and they couldn't do anything. Enlin, I've already captured all of the heavenly Tao of this world. Should I destroy them all? A cold and tender voice sounded. This was none other than little Xie. Enlin looked at the shattered world before him. Destroy.